to the yeah, thank you, Uriel. So hi everyone. Very nice to see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of unfamiliar faces, but that's even better. So this is like the 10th year of the Living Machines Conference. I've had the pleasure to actually be part of it from the first year personally, and I know a lot of people like Nathan that have been also there like since the very beginning, like almost, I don't know, it was the first year too, no? Yeah. So like it's very very nice, and the truth is that I mean it's all based it's all because of like all the people that have been like collaborating and participating to these to the living machines, that it has been successful for the last 10 years. We've had amazing like presentations and publication and yeah, submissions. The venues have always been great. So COVID has allowed us to do this online. This is a new format because of the 10 years. So happy to be here. And so just a little bit before we start, make sure that everyone has their microphone on. If you're not presenting, please turn off your camera so that we make sure that there's no problem with the streaming. For any questions, you can use the chat, and please keep in mind that we also have the Discord. So use it, you can use it like we've used it in the previous workshops. Make sure that you use like for our workshop, the discussion there. So because the problem is with Zoom, once you close it, you lose all of the conversation. So Discord, the nice thing is that you can keep discussing afterwards. So that's very nice. So we have a lot of amazing people presenting today, from Nathan Lepora, Tobias Fisher, Claudio Sito, Mehmet Togar, Dingo Zhang, Lorenzo Cominelli, and Anna Tavenska. You will see amazing talks. I'm really looking forward to all of them. And yeah, I will allow Uriel to make the presentation for the first one.
Yeah, so thanks, Vicky. We'll have, first, we'll have 4 talks, and we'll have a small discussion at the end of these 4 talks. Then we'll have a break. Then the second part with another 3 talks, and also a brief discussion at the end of the second half. So first we'll have Nathan Lepora with talking about whiskers, fingers, hands, and brains. Nathan, you want to start, please?
Yep, thank you, Uriel. This almost seems like a meeting of Living Machines program chairs, because I've noticed we've got about 2/3 of the, I mean, Vicky, Uriel, Michael have all been program chairs. I've done it 3 times. I was the program chair for the first 2, and then I don't know why I agreed to do it again in like 2016. So, so quite funny to see us all here. So I think you were the nice ones as well. You put me on your as an author, as an editor on it when I didn't really do anything. So that was great. Okay, so I'll start. Okay, hopefully that's working. Okay, so whiskers, fingers, hands, and brains. So there's going to be a lot more about fingers and hands, but basically, which is my usual talk I give on the research from my lab. And I've inserted a bit on whiskers and brains into this. I wanted to give some historical context from work that because I usually, present the work from my lab as in, this is what we're up to now. But actually, it's the reason we're doing this work stems back to work that I did with Tony and Uriel, a decade or so ago. And so I just wanted to get that historical introduction, in a historical perspective into this. So I'm Nathan Lepora, University of Bristol Robotics Laboratory. So this is going to start off with how I usually introduce my talks, which is to, to say that robot dexterity is the most important problem in robotics, handling goods, because once you have robots that can handle objects with the dexterity that humans can, then robots can do any physical tasks that humans can. And we like to think that humans are special because of our big brains, etc. But which is true. But you know, the reason we have big brains is because we're adept at using our hands for dexterous use, such as creating technology. We wouldn't have technology without our hands. All technology stems ultimately back to something that was first created by hand, and you know, has led to the transformation of the world that we see around us. So and immediate. So that's kind of, you know, kind of more abstract impacts of demonstrating a robot with human-like dexterous capabilities. Now, more specific, tangible impacts that will be coming in the next 5 years or so. You know, for example, it enables automated logistics. So companies like Ocado and Amazon, clearly they are investing hugely in this. It's kind of like, you know, the future automated logistics will be like the veins where goods are transported around our countries autonomously. Manufacturing, obviously, for autonomous manufacturing, autonomous agriculture, really robots and robot grippers and manipulators have a big part to play there. Haptics and VR, healthcare, education, domestic robotics doing our household chores. Now, the list is endless. Anything we can do with our hands, if once robots get human-like dexterity, they can do too. So a key part of the human hand is our human sense of touch. And the human hand has been honed by millions of years of evolution into a general purpose manipulation device. Nothing else comes close. Now, there's many other model systems that people use in say, you know, the crow can dexterously manipulate twigs and items with its beaks. You know, people talk about the dexterity of the octopus tentacles and elephant trunks. You know, elephants, octopuses, crows haven't built skyscrapers. They haven't done technology. All those other capabilities pale into insignificance compared to the advanced dexterity that we're able to do with our hands. So surely then we should look to the human hand to design and deploy robots that are capable of human-like dexterity. And a necessary aspect of human hand function is our sense of touch. So I see the human hand as duplicating or reproducing the functionality of it in robotics. I see that as an example of a living machine. It has impact because of the broad applications it can do, but as well in creating a device with the capabilities of the human hand, you then have a means to understand human intelligence through the embodiment of how that intelligence is used. So in having a lab to reproduce the functionality of the human hand, the dexterity and touch, what kind of, this is a question I had to ask myself, say 5 or 6 years ago when I founded my lab. What capabilities do you need? What skills do you need in order to do that? And it's a challenge because the broad range of expertise that you, hi Mehmet, that you need to have. So we span, you need to understand soft robotics and be able to use soft robotics. Our hands are soft, and that's an important part of the capabilities of how we use them. Artificial intelligence, obviously the intelligence to control and to perceive, and deep learning has really been an enabling technology in that. To have an understanding of neurophysiology, if you want to reproduce the human hand function, you need to understand how the perception, proprioception are implemented in our hands to get human capabilities. Neuroscience, how do our brains control our hands? That's useful information too in reproducing the human hand function. And then to have a lab that does this, you can't buy these hands with these capabilities. You need to make them yourself. So your lab needs to have expertise in building robot hardware, fabricating the robots, and then also traditional robot control. So these, deep learning is very modern. So, but traditional robot control that dates back 60 or 70 years is still very much, you need to have expertise in those methods. And so it makes this a challenging area to work in because of this broad range of expertise that you need to bring together. And so that's consequently, now my lab is fairly, is for a reasonably young lab, 5 or so years, we're a fair size. And that's because we need this broad range of expertise and a diversity of perspectives and approaches in order to make headway on this problem. So now for the kind of historical interlude from whiskers to fingertip. How did I get to the stage where I have a lab that is looking at this problem? So I wanted to kind of take a step back, and so I first started working in robotics with Tony on the Biotact grant about a decade ago. So I don't know how many people here will be familiar with the Biotact grant, but basically Tony had a sequence of large grants on multi-partner grants on whisker-based robots, basically emulating the rodent whisker capabilities in artificially, and also understanding how rats use their whiskers to perceive and interact with the world. So this kind of culminated with a huge one, Biotact, that was like 10, 11 partners, massive grant across the EU. Now, I wasn't part of this at the start. Fortunately, there was an exchange rate. I was looking for a job, and there was an exchange rate fluctuations that basically created a new post. And then I had expertise in some decision making, some artificial intelligence that fitted into some work that needed doing on the grant. So I came in quite late in the last year or two of the grant. And the work that I did with Tony, and then other people, Charles Fox, Matthew Evans, was on developing basically a perceptual system for robots with a sense of touch, in this case whiskered robots, that was based on decision-making methods that were popular, well, and are popular in neuroscience. So these are kind of Bayesian methods for making decision-making, optimal decision-making, that I kind of transcribed those methods over to a robotics perspective, and then applied to do kind of biometric perception using whiskered robots. And we had a series of papers in like ICRA, IROS, usual places, and Royal Society interface paper. Now then, and I say Charles Fox was so Tony led that work. Charles Fox was very influential in the kind of Bayesian and decision-making perspectives. Matthew Evans encouraged the kind of big data approach. We've looked at it now, but it was a decade or so ago. Kevin Gurney, the decision-making and relationship to models of the brain. So it's kind of a lot of influences in there, which are still with me today in the work we do in my lab. And then kind of the next stage, there was a grant EFA, which was with Tony, Paul Vishaw was the coordinator for that, where it was working with an iCub sensor touch in a kind of broader context of embodied functional Android systems. But at Sheffield, what we basically had was a single fingertip from an iCub robot, and so what I did is I kind of transcribed the methods that we've been working on the whiskered robots over to the sensor cutaneous sensor touch on the iCub fingertip, working with Uriel. Uriel was a PhD student at the time, and basically Uriel did the hardware work. He basically, as you'll see in a minute, he set up some Lego robots, heroic work actually, in setting up an appropriate robot platform to do these experiments. It set an XY table with Lego manipulators on them, and this iCub fingertip glued to the end. And then, myself, Uriel, Tony, we had a series of papers in like ICRA, IROS, RSS, etc., on the kind of decision-making methods, but linking them back to active perception, kind of controlling the interaction in order to perceive the environment better, which is linked with how rodents use their whisker system, but we also, it's also an intrinsic part of how we use our hands to perceive through a sense of touch. Now that work basically gave me enough of kind of a founding in robotics that I was able to get a lectureship at the University of Bristol, where I founded my own lab. I say it's really that work that gave the evidence that I was an appropriate appointment to make at the University of Bristol, and then I'll come to the work we've done later. But really, this is where it all stemmed from. So, and then a kind of offshoot of that was so we kind of pitched some of this as a kind of tactile super resolution methods. The methods we were using were kind of linked in with visual super resolution, which was a big thing at the time. Got a Nobel Prize in 2014 in microscopy, and that's kind of enabled a pitch about how you need super resolution for these quite low resolution tactile sensors that we were using at the time. The iCub fingertip only has 12 sensing elements on it, and you see the ones I use now are very different. But super resolution is something that's carried on, and there's papers in Science Robotics last year. So this is an idea that is still very active today, and also enabled me to get my first grant as well. So that was obviously a key step in my career too. And then Uriel's work fitted in with this because so Uriel helped me by doing the robot experiments, and then I do the analysis, like papers on the work that I described that I was doing. And then kind of the other side to that was I was kind of Uriel's third PhD supervisor, but we worked together very closely, and I helped Uriel write his papers and helped him with the direction of research at the time, gave him advice, so what he did is he took these kind of active perception methods that we were using for perceiving, for if you like moving the sensor in a way that it would perceive the environment better. His idea was to take that forward into a full interaction with the environment, where in this case it's exploring around objects, and it was basically adapting this feedback loop for active perception, so that it was an active exploration task it was doing instead. And so it was, he had this system, say using this Lego robot that was mounted on an XY table with the iCub fingertip at the bottom, and that would then tap around these shapes. And see there you kind of linking together control with perception, and as I said, where the work was picked was active sensor motor control for exploring via touch. So that was Uriel's PhD, and I think I get the impression that helped him with his career. Uriel was obviously now at the University of Bath as a member of the staff, and this is kind of where he's done lots of work since. But I guess like myself, I imagine this work must have influenced him in the work that he's been doing since as well. And then I'm just going to mention as a side, because I did say brains in my title, but very small bit. So I still do have a thread of work in computational neuroscience, but the robotics has tended to dominate. I still very much see the original perception methods as a robot instantiation of some models of the basal ganglia and of action selection. So that I have a grant on that, and there's work that's going to be coming out soon. Neuroscience progresses a lot slower than robotics, so it's taken a while to come out. But you can kind of view these original, these Bayesian methods, these active perception methods. There are ways to link it back to sensory motor loops via the basal ganglia and brain and so on. But I'm not going to go into that in any more detail in this talk. So to kind of say, I got a job at Bristol, and so I mean the iCub fingertip was great for the work we were doing, but it had limitations. I mean, we had one fingertip, we basically had to scrounge another one off IIT when that broke. Bits were kind of rubber, were falling off it. Relatively low resolution. There were some issues with it, but I mean, if you've got a lab, I wanted to have a lab that's pushing forward tactile sensing and robot hands. And you really, my view was you need control over the technology that you're using in your lab. Otherwise, you can't develop that. You can't. It's in somebody else's hands how that technology is going to be, and you need that control for when you have a lab of your own. So it was key for me to get a technology for tactile sensing that I could use for the kind of research questions that I wanted to address. So fortunately, the job I got was at Bristol, where they had the TAC tip technology, which was developed by Jonathan Roster and Craig Chorley in 2009. And is and in my view was an excellent tactile sensor for many reasons that I'll come to for the rest of this talk. But kind of the short kind of summary is that I transferred the work that we've been doing on the iCub fingertip to use this Tactip, which is an optical tactile sensor and is 3D printed, uses a camera, with my first PhD student at Bristol, Ben Ward-Cherrier, who actually came through Sheffield as well, as it happened. So he's now a member of staff as well and a research fellow. This is some way ago, but he's now taken this in a different direction from myself. And then this is kind of an approach that I've been working on with my group and the team for about 5 or 6 years, and and we've got a couple of review papers. One recently just been accepted, summarising that work that I'm now going to briefly go through for the rest of this talk. And then so as part of the work as well, I transferred over Uriel's methods for tactile exploration onto our robot, and this is it working sort of 4 or 5 years ago. We've got different ways of doing it now, but this is kind of to show this is kind of what Uriel did for, as I say, on using our hardware setup. I show this because it's quite important to get a context for the work that we've been doing more recently, where we're using deep learning and other methods instead to get this kind of functionality. Okay, so on to the present. I'm guessing I've probably got 15 minutes or so. So is that right, Uriel?
Yeah, you have like 20 minutes more or less. Yeah.
20 minutes to the end, and then that's no questions then. Okay.
But yeah, you have some questions.
Okay, so yeah, I'll try to be quick then.
Good.
it might be there's not much time for questions, but I'll just. So but anyway, so we've been working on, my lab's been working on this 5 or 6 years. We started off, say, with the Tactip design that was developed by Jonathan Roster, Craig Chorley. And now in bringing that technology into my group, we've now, and using 3D printing to manufacture this tactile sensor, and we have some very good 3D printers at the Robotics lab. Kind of the designs have now proliferated, and you can see, we now do it in many different shapes and sizes, integrated into robot hands, which is where you need a fingertip sensor. Many designs of robot hands integrated into robotic systems. We have it as the feet of walking robots, and I've even gone back to something more like what I started with Tony, with the whisker-based sensors. We've also got an active version of this as well, which is kind of like the kind of whisker technology where I started this journey. That's the active whisker one there. And the kind of principles by way this works. So I now kind of think of this as soft biometric optical tactile sensing, softbox. So say it's stemmed from the BRL Tactip, Chorley and Roster, which itself was inspired by another technology called the tactile contact lens. The way the sensor works is it has a camera inside, as an elastomeric dome deforms. Tactile sensors measure deformation under contact, and then it has these pins on the inside with markers on, and the camera basically picks up the movement of the marker. So I consider this to be a combination of soft, it uses elastomeric materials, biometric. For reasons I'll come to, we have similar structures in our skin between the dermis and epidermis, and it's based on the structure of human skin. Optical, uses a camera, and so the Tactip uniquely combines these 3 important aspects of tactile sensing into a single technology, which is the Tactip. Let's say the way it works is it's got this kind of stiffer outer layer of skin, which is modeled by the kind of 3D printed rubber. And then in human skin, there's these dermal papillae, which protrudes from the epidermis, the outer layer, into the dermis, the softer inner layer of skin, where the mechanoreceptors, the sensing elements, are embedded. And then, so that's reproduced by 3D printing, and there's a softer gel that these papillae, these pins, penetrate into. It measures contact through shear rather than normal pressure. So most tactile sensors measure normal pressure. Tactic measures by shear. That is how human skin is believed to function in terms of its geometric sense, at least. And I say it works on this kind of levering of the pins. That also acts as an amplification mechanism, because they're levers that amplifies the surface deformation into the shear deformation that's picked up with the camera. So as well as turning deformation into shear that can be picked up with the camera, it also amplifies the original deformation, which makes the sensors more sensitive to. And then it's biometric, so you can link it to the human sensitivity. So there's, skipped over this one. So you can kind of think of the geometric aspects as relating to one type of mechanoreceptor called SA1. So these would be like the pin displacements. And then the velocities, the movement of these markers, of these pins, you can think as a signal that's analogous to that produced by a second type of mechanoreceptor, which could be rapidly adapting RA type 1 mechanoreceptors. Now, it turns out in human skin, the RA1 mechanoreceptors are related to our feeling of slippage. The slippage is a really important capability to measure in the human hand, because our hands at the end of the day are about holding objects. Not dropping objects is clearly critical while we're manipulating them or trying to grab them. And a sense of slip is key to be able to not drop objects. You need to be able to feel that object is about to drop or is dropping to correct for it. Now it turns out that so this design with the pins and this biometric design was never designed for slip detection. It was actually designed for edge detection. That's Jonathan Roster and Craig Chorley's original idea. Turns out in work we've done a few years ago now, is basically the ideal way to design a slip detector as well. And we've shown that you can get very highly accurate slip detection with this sensor. I won't go, there isn't time to go into detail, but basically you get this very coherent pattern of pin velocities when a slip event occurs. And we've since taken that forward to incipient slip detection, which is where before an item actually drops. So I wanted to give a flavour there for the kind of a linking back to the biomimetics. But so we've got several papers on this, and there's quite there's a long story about and lots of details about the relationship between the physical structure, this artificial fingertip, and the structure of human skin. And then there's various other aspects of functionality of human skin that we've also brought into the sense capabilities, such as a vibration sense that's critical to temperature sensing in some work. A fingerprint turns out to be crucial for sensing as well. And then I say Ben Ward-Cherrier has taken this in the direction of using a neuromorphic camera, so that you have a neuromorphic tactile sensor. And then clearly that's closely related to how signal transduction takes place in, we use spikes in the human nervous system. It's mimicking that in their fingertip. So that's Ben's work that he's now going off in an independent direction for myself. Okay, so I'm going to give the last 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to give a series of demonstrations of the kind of capabilities of what we can do with this technology now. So most of these demonstrations were actually done within the last year or two in my lab. They were pretty much all enabled by adopting deep learning technology in the lab. So it's an optical tactile sensor, it has a camera in it, fits very well with using convolutional neural networks to do the perception from the camera images. And that has really, I say, been a game changer in our lab and enabled us to do pretty much all the demos that I'm going to describe now. Okay, so I'm going to start with tactile grasping. So this is on robot hands. So this is the hand that Jasper built. So he was a PhD student that's just finished. So he integrated the Modulo Grab Lab hand. So this is a very well-known robotic hand. It's also called the reflex hand, being commercialized by Right Hand Robotics. This is a hand that won the DARPA Grand Challenge about 8 years or so ago. Aaron Dollar designed that and then openly released the 3D printed the CADs for 3D printing it, and then which in my view is the right thing to do for the community, and certainly enable. I've never worked with him directly. I've never even spoken with him, but it certainly enabled a lot of the research in my group, because we've rebuilt those hands using his designs and then integrated it, or say we Jasper, and then integrated it with the Tactile. And this is kind of, so it's a very good hand at grasping things, as you can see in that picture there. That's what it was designed to do. So here we're using deep learning directly from the tactile images to do two useful things with the hand. One is to just using the sense of touch to recognize the object that's been picked up. So from a set of about 30 or 40 objects. This is kind of the obvious thing you would do with a sense of touch when you're trying to validate its use. So here, it can recognize this as a strawberry, for example, by holding it up. Now, potentially, so that's useful, and you can imagine how that might be used by Ocado or some other companies to recognize items. A more useful capability is to predict whether the grasp is going to be successful, which you can also use using supervised deep learning methods by labeling successful and unsuccessful grasp. In this case, so it just picked up a Rubik's Cube correctly. Now a slightly different grasp pose, picking it up, predicts the grasp is going to fail, and it does do. So that is, that is a useful capability to have in autonomous grasping systems, because then you can re-grasp the item and ensure that you're going to get a stable grasp. Okay, so I'm going to bring in a bit more about slip tip. This is one demonstration that actually doesn't use deep learning. This is quite a simple classifier used for this. So again, this is work from Jasper that's just been published in Transactions on Robotics. So basically, you use the methods I described before about pin velocities and looking for a signature of slip in the velocity of the markers as just a detector of whether the item's going to slip. And then, as you can see, it just works. So here the challenge is you want the latency of the loop to correct so it doesn't work all the time, but it works most of the time. So the fingertips need to detect that a slip has happened, and then the latency of the loop to control the hand to then shut to regrasp the object has to be fast enough that it's able to catch it before it drops from the grasp, which needs to be on the order of about 30 milliseconds. So, and then Jasper put in quite a lot of hard work to getting the latency of this down and, to getting this to work. And then, there's a couple of other applications here. So this is like changing the weight of an object to regrasp it. And this one is a minimal force grasp by it's closing on the object until it's got the minimum force that's needed to lift it, and then picks it up. Which it's about to do. Here you go. So it's trying to grasp, pick it up, slipping until it's detected it's not slipping anymore, stops, and then you've got a minimum force closure grasp. Okay, so I'm going to move to tactile servo control. So this is the work that Uriel did on tactile exploration was a kind of a more neuroscience, active perception based approach for how you do, say, contour following or following an object. So there was other work in the field that's more based upon using a kind of more standard control approach. So you can also view this from a control perspective, where you've got something like a PI controller, and you want to apply that PI control using the language of control theory to set up, this kind of exploratory behaviors using touch. So that would be kind of analogous to, say, visual servo control, which is a well-established area of robotics. So in recent work, in bringing in deep learning into the control, it kind of necessitated a change to this more kind of formal way of doing control theory, which, as I say, is very closely related to visual servo control. Basically a PI controller, but with a PoseNet, a deep learning model in it that extracts the pose. So this is this working. So this is challenging because as you slide over the object, well, first of all, this was trained on something like a flat surface, and yet, it still works on quite complex objects that have got textures quite unlike what it's trained on. That's the magic of deep learning that allows it to generate. And then secondly, there's an issue here that as it slides over the surface, that deforms the tactile sensor. And what you're trying to do here is infer the pose so that you can, of the local surface, so you can control the robot over it. And so that makes that pose estimation quite difficult. And then so we had to do some quite heavy lifting on the deep learning in order to solve that problem. But it's solved, and then you get this kind of robust behavior that that works. So same deep learning model, but now it works basically on whatever item you give it. It can follow around. This problem had been addressed before on like rigid, flat tactile sensors, but using soft, deformable tactile sensors, basically there were no methods to do this kind of control of interaction. And I kind of see this as a key step, because if you can't do this basic, controlling a sensor to kind of lightly brush over a surface, how are you going to be able to do more complicated things such as manipulating or interacting with objects? So I saw that as a key step. And in terms of manipulating and interacting with objects, so here's a very similar, it's more complex algorithm, but it's based upon tactile servo control again. So it's done by John Lloyd, also published in Transactions in Robotics. And so now it's just using a sense of touch to push the items to a goal location. So this is an example of non-prehensile manipulation in the plane. Let's say it's a very simple kind of behavior-based feedback loop controller, but it as you see, it's very robust and basically works. It doesn't know anything about the objects it's pushing, but just because of the magic of deep learning, it generalizes over a range of objects, including sort of natural objects and so on. Okay, so in-hand manipulation. This is getting to stuff that's sort of kind of incomplete, but we've started making some steps towards. So a couple of hand platforms here. So one is we're using the PISA IIT soft hand, which is an anthropomorphic hand, which we've made a significant step in the technology of the tactip and been able to get it down to the size of a human fingertip so that we could integrate it with the hand. You can see that's a fingertip there. And then the second, so that's a one-off hand, but it has a soft, like soft morphological intelligence in the design of the hand. And then the other hand here is a shadow modular grasper, which is fully actuated, and that we've also integrated with the tactip. So I realize I'm running out of time. So this is an example of it's a kind of an in-hand manipulation task. What it's doing is it's trying to stabilize the grasp using a sense of touch. It's a bit like the servo control, but instead this is now the full actuation of the hand enables it to basically converge towards the most stable grasp using a sense of touch. This work's just been published, and Effie, who did this work, she's taken this forward into, once you can do this, then you can start manipulating objects in hand using similar methods, which is what she's looking at the moment. And again, we're interested in, whatever object you give it, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know about the object. The controller still works, including like squidgy objects like rubber brains and so on. And then this is the integration with the soft hand, where we're not doing this kind of sophistication in the in-hand manipulation, but this is more just demonstrating, that the tactile sensor works. And here, what it's doing, it's just controlling the amount of force, basically, it's exerting on these objects. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll skip quickly through this last part, which is our most recent work. So in collaboration with DeepMind, we've been looking at so all the methods before were supervised deep learning. So you give it labeled data, it then basically predicts kind of a feed-forward network to make predictions that you can use to control the robot and so on. An alternative paradigm is to teach the controller using reward signals instead through reinforcement. Again, using deep learning for the network, for the controller. So that's deep reinforcement learning. And so Alex Church in my lab has been co-supervised with via HadCell and DeepMind to do this. So it's a different approach. Deep reinforcement learning requires more data. So this is it learning how to type on a Braille keyboard. So this took a couple of days for it to learn how to do it. Basically, the robot needed to learn the layout of the keyboard and what the meaning of the identity of the Braille keys, just from reward, just from being told when it's got it right. But you leave it for a couple of days using these methods, and then it works. And then more recently, Alex has made a breakthrough in that. So an issue with using deep reinforcement learning is that you requires a lot of data. So then, potentially a solution to that is instead, if you can do a lot of the learning in simulation instead, and once you've learned it in simulation, you want to transfer that learnt policy, that learnt controller back to reality. So that's a challenging problem because it's very difficult to simulate tactile data. But Alex has designed a method which can do that sim to real transfer. Basically uses a GAN, generative adversarial network, to learn that mapping between simulation and reality. And then has managed to basically perform all of the tasks that we did before using supervised learning, using deep reinforcement learning. And with that, I see I've ran out of time. Yours back. So I'll just quickly finish off. Robot dexterity using a touch is a pale shadow of human dexterity, but it's starting to look achievable. Deep learning appears to be the key to unlock this. And I say this all links back to models of brain and neuroscience, but that's to be seen. Okay, and then I'll say thanks to my lab and thanks to everyone for listening. Okay.
Thank you, Nathan. It's very, very nice talk. It's very nice to see all these progressions of, as you say, from whiskers, fingers, and hands. And it was nice to see the icon fingertip as well.
Yeah, you know, that's great work.
Great. So, is it any question from? Yeah, Vicky, please.
Yeah, I actually have a question. Thank you, Nathan. Fantastic talk. I have a question. So I remember that with the figures of the ICAP, you could also do some sort of surface classification, right? Can you be able to do the same thing with this technology? Because was this Uri also? I don't remember, but I remember that by sampling with the finger of the ICAP, you could be able to discriminate between rough or smoother surfaces. How about now with this approach?
I think Uriel can probably answer this question as well. But so one of our papers was on texture perception using the ICAP fingertip, where we rubbed it over lots of different types of sandpaper. Not a good thing with an ICAP fingertip because it's quite abrasive and ruins the fingertip. But so the ICAP fingertip, although it's quite low resolution, only 12 taxels, it is high frequency, kilohertz or so. So that allows you to feel vibration. The optical tactile sensors limited by the frame rate of the camera. So typically we use it about 100 frames per second. So that's not great for texture. There's two ways to go with that. One is we can put a vibration sense in there. So basically we've done this using a microphone. We embed that in the gel, and then you've got a high frequency mode, which is kind of akin to the Pacinian corpuscle system in human sense touch. That's one way. The other way is to use a high frame rate camera, or even better, what Ben is doing, which is to use a neuromorphic camera, and then there's no limitation on frame rate because neuromorphic cameras, don't work that way. They don't have a frame rate, and so that's another way to go. So Ben's looking at texture. That's it. I may even have. I think it's got a paper on texture as well. So using neuromorphic tech.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Is there another question you want to ask?
But we could also do stuff because we're going to have a discussion in the break as well.
We're already ready for the next talk. Okay, so Tobias, are you ready? So the next talk is from Tobias Fisher. So he's currently an associate investigator and research fellow at Queensland University of Technology's Research Center for Robotics. And his main goal is developing high performance algorithms, bio-inspired computer vision algorithms that simultaneously analyze animal and human and robot perception capabilities. Tobias, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. Thanks very much, Uriel, for inviting me. And thanks a lot, Nathan, for the really interesting talk to start with. You took a couple of the points I have in my final slide in things that we should do in the next 10 years. And I think they came up in your talk, so that's really cool. You obviously said that, tactile perception is really, really important, and I fully agree with that. But at the same time, we always think that our own research is the most important one. So visual processing in the brain takes up 50% of the cortex or so. So I'd argue that visual perception is, the thing you would want to do. And yes, I see you there. That's obviously, we all need to work together, and that's one of my final discussion points at the end as well. I'm going to talk about those neuromorphic event cameras that Nathan briefly chatted about. And those cameras, they take inspiration by the human eye. So it's basically at the very beginning of the visual processing pathway in what they're trying to emulate. And then we need all the additional steps that come later on in the brain to do actually useful things. So I'm going to talk about those things in the context of especially place recognition and robot navigation, because I think that those are interesting tasks that all kind of robots need to do if we want to do useful things. And let me start with a brief comparison in how conventional camera represent images and what an event image representation is. So when we think of images, then a grayscale image basically is a representation of a matrix, and each of those pixels has a value associated describing how bright a pixel is at that particular value. And a video is a collection of those representations just concatenated together over time. So it provides a complete representation at fixed time intervals. And you can imagine that there's a lot of redundancy in there if there's nothing happening in the scene. If I don't move at all, Zoom is still going to, well, thanks to image compression, not so much, but if we were to transfer raw images, it would be really, really highly redundant. So this is what the standard camera output looks like, whereas with the event vision, what we see down there in the bottom is just an events triggered, and they capture the change in the intensity brightness. And if nothing is changing, then we don't have any events in an ideal event camera. So this is really, really cool. But at the same time, as things move very, very quickly, then we get a lot of events. So they nicely scale with the amount of change that is happening in the scene. And an event is described by the event coordinate XY, the really, really precise timestamp, and the polarity, which is just a binary indicator of whether something got brighter or darker. So it's a completely different representation to conventional images, and that makes them really, really interesting because we need new algorithms if we want to deal with those, with this new data stream efficiently. We can't just use our standard traditional computer vision algorithms that people have been designing over the past 40 years or so. We need to think really, really carefully in how we can make use of this really dense information if things change quickly. Now, I'm not, Nathan, you're an amazing expert in designing hardware. I'm not, I'm a software guy. So I'm still going to briefly trying to explain how it actually works. So we have photoreceptors, and then they capture the lock intensity at each pixel. So each pixel operates independently, which is very different from a normal camera as well, where we either have a rolling shutter or global shutters. So in a global shutter, the information of each pixel in the whole image is all retrieved at the same time. Whereas with those event cameras, each pixel operates independently. And if the change in the brightness intensity of the log intensity exceeds a given threshold, either in the positive direction, something got brighter, or in the negative direction, something got darker, then an event is triggered. And it's really, really nice because we can change all of those, they call them biases, all of those thresholds we can change independently as well. So that might give us some additional information as well, and we can adapt to different scenes. There's a variable output rate, so the more motion, the more events, and the output is, as I said, the change in brightness. And what's really cool is that they're super, super fast, those cameras. So they have microsecond resolution and sub millisecond latency. So it's really nice if you want to do processing on something which is really fast. So we're going to look in the future at airplanes and stuff where you know, you can imagine they move very, very quickly, drones, so a conventional camera might not be suitable for those application cases. And there's obviously the bio-inspiration, so that, you know, they're at the beginning of the dorsal pathway, so the rare pathway. What other benefits do they have? They have a very, very low latency, bandwidth, and sorry, the power consumption is just really, really low, suitable for high-speed application, and they have a really, really high dynamic range, which means that you know, you can go from lower light to brighter light, so it can all be in one scene. So this is a typical example of, I'm going to show a video later on, leaving a tunnel where in a conventional camera you have this overexposure, whereas those event cameras, because each pixel operates independently, there's basically no over or underexposure of scenes. Challenges though are that they're typically of a low resolution, much lower resolution than normal cameras, and we need to rethink on how we process those events as standard methods aren't suitable. And here we see what a output actually looks like. So you see those red and blue pixels. So red is something that brighter, blue is something that darker. And if we apply those cameras on a drone, and that's not my work, by the way, that's in Davide Scaramuso's lab at ETH Zurich, you see a standard camera down there in the bottom, we have nice motion blur, whereas on the top, these events, you don't perceive any motion blur at all. And what you can do is to, well, I previously said we shouldn't, and I still think that we really shouldn't, you can reconstruct normal images from those events and still obtain the same advantages in the sense of the higher dynamic range. So here you see, if you take an event over time and feed them into a deep network, which is recurrent, then you can reconstruct images, and you see that the reconstruction is basically light at the end of the tunnel, whereas in the normal camera, there's just overexposure at the end of the tunnel. And you can do that by feeding those events over time into, as I said, a deep network, and do that recurrently. So you feed the reconstruction at time step t-1 and feed that, as well as the new events that are captured, and you can obtain new images over time. Now, I do that in the context of visual place recognition. So what is visual place recognition? If you have a data set of images, sort of places that you're interested in, and that could be places of all over the world, different representations, and you want to find out where you are. So that's the typical kidnap robot problem kind of thing. So you just get a query image. You want to find out, have you been to this place before? First of all, yes or no? And secondly, if yes, which of those reference images was it? And that's really useful in indoor scenarios. So let's imagine, I'd like to think, well, I don't like to think about it, but hospital settings, you know, there are those really huge buildings and everything kind of looks the same. So wouldn't it be great if you could just point a camera and that would direct us in the right direction, those buildings, tunnels where we don't have GPS information. Here in Australia, mining is a really great example as well, where place recognition can be useful. Now, the issue with place recognition is that same places can look very, very dissimilar if they were captured at different times of the day or different seasons. So here on the left-hand side, we see two images of actually the same place, but they have really, really low similarity, those images. Whereas on the right side, we see different places with a very, very high similarity. So we call that perceptual aliasing. And that's really tricky to come up with algorithms that can deal with that. So how do we typically do it? We represent each of those images by a feature vector. And because of time, I'm not going to go into depth in how to do that. But we find a low dimensional representation of each of those images and of the query image. Now we can compare those images using just the cosine similarity or the Euclidean distance between those feature representations. And we can find the best match by obviously finding the one which has the lowest distance. How do we do that with event cameras? So there's two ways. There's one way in reconstructing those images, as I previously introduced, and then using the standard techniques, which is what I've done in my first work published last year in RAL. So we have the event stream, we reconstruct the query images as well as the reference images. And the trick is that I hadn't done this reconstruction just in one way. So you can basically pick in the length of your reconstruction window, and that in that case you obtain different reconstructions. So here's the same place reconstructed with different durations of the windows that you accumulate over time. And all of those reconstructions look slightly different, which has advantages because if you then do comparisons, those slight difference in the image can actually point you towards whether two places are actually the same or not. So it's really cool if we use an ensemble approach to fuse all this information together, and we've shown that actually the ensemble works much, much better than just a single reconstruction. And you do that obviously for the query images as well as for the reference images. Then you obtain those feature vectors that I previously talked about. And then you can fuse all this information together using a simple mean ensemble where you aggregate the hypotheses of each of those, we call them distance matrices, to obtain an ensemble matrix. In that ensemble matrix, you can then make your decisions on where you're actually located. So I was driving around Brisbane here a couple of times during lockdown and obtained some images, at different times of the day, and we can then use that to localize ourselves against each other. Now, if you look at the main takeaway of the performance graphs here, so it's the recall performance. So the higher recall, the better it is. I want you to look at the green and the black bars. So the green bars, if you just use a single reconstruction window, which is our baseline, and then the black one is we use the proposed ensemble approach, and we see that there's a huge performance improvement over the baseline if we use this ensemble approach. And interestingly, it works even better than the frame-based representations that we found. And that comes with a caveat because the frame-based representation is obtained from the event camera as well. So it has quite low resolution, etc. As well, just like the event output. So if you were to use a recent phone camera or a decent other camera, then the frame-based approach actually would still work better. Now, I'm going to skip that in interest of time, but I want to give you a bit of an outlook on how to make better use of those events and how to avoid this computationally expensive reconstruction step, and how to design an algorithm that actually uses the, I call it raw information of the events rather than going via the reconstruction. So you can select stellium pixels. I call them stellium because there's more, some pixels contain much more information than others. That's obviously depending on the particular scene that you are interested in. So I'm interested in road-based scenarios. And what you see on the top left is the average number of events over a 1 second period. And you can see that the edges there, it's where, you know, the trees and other things, they kind of fly past. So the most information content is in those pixels, as opposed to the pixels here at the bottom where the road is, because the road more or less always looks the same, regardless of where you are. And now if you select some of those salient pixels, and it's sufficient to select, you know, a couple of handfuls of them, you can actually recognize places remarkably well. So on the top, you see on the x-axis the place ID, so where you are within the traverse, and on the y-axis the number of events. And in blue and in orange, you see two different traverses that were captured at different days. And you see there's a really, really high resolution. And that's just a single pixel. So if you aggregate this information across multiple pixels, you can actually recognize places remarkably easily and with really, really low computational power. So that's quite cool. Now, I think I've got 2-3 minutes left. Is that right, Ariel? Cool. 2 minutes, cool. So brief overview of other words. So I might actually have to skip this one, but there's DAC, so the distributed adaptive control, which probably most people here are familiar with by Paul Verschuur and the cognitive architecture. And what we've done in the VCV project is to come up with this really, really cool human-robot interaction where the robot acquires knowledge over time, and it's an interplay between knowledge acquisition and knowledge expression of the robot. Over time, we can do really, really complex behaviors in that. And secondly, I've also come up with a computational model of perspective taking, which is the task of, you know, trying to understand what another person can see. And that's a standard, typical neuro-robotics approach where we can replicate what we find in the human brain based on a simplified model of perspective taking. And what I found interesting about this particular piece of work is that we can't only replicate data from individual humans, but also from a population response of multiple humans. And if we use a population of models, we can find correspondences there. Now, in my last minute, my take on the future of the neuro-robotics field, because I might not be able to join later on because it's getting late here, the panel discussion. So my take on it is we need more active perception. Nathan talked about it. And evaluation of active perception is really, really hard, and we need to make further breakthroughs there. We need more than the attention in deep networks, and we need a representation of uncertainty if you want to do nice active perception. And I'm a vision guy. Let's convince the computer vision community that things are far from solved when you apply computer vision algorithms on robotic systems. We need to couple neuromorphic hardware and physical robotic systems, so that lends itself to the event-based processing. We can do adaptive control, on-the-fly adaptation, etc., etc. And I think that will lead to robust multimodal perception algorithms that can be applied in the real world. And thirdly, we need more large-scale systems like the DAC-H3. We need those large projects, and we need to integrate those multiple components because they show shortcomings of the theories of cognitive architectures as well as shortcomings of individual components. And I think we need to go away from the concept of artificial general intelligence and towards more intuitive robotic systems. And yeah, we need to make steps towards this direction. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tobias. I think it's a very nice presentation. So we'll leave, I think, questions at the end, right? Because we don't have now more time. Yeah. So thank you. So our next speaker is Dr. Claudio Sito. So he's a researcher in control AI and robotics at the Autonomous Robotics Research Center the Technology Innovation Institute in Abu Dhabi. So you want to start, Claudio, please?
Yes. Can you see the slides?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me and for the introduction. Yes. So my talk is about knowledge and skill transfer for robot manipulation tasks. I'll try to be synthetic and to give a overview of the work I've done, and but also give me the opportunity to present the Autonomous Robotic Research Center, which is a brand new research center that has started last year, in January last year, in Abu Dhabi, and is a collection of 7 centers. The TII is a collection of 7 centers, and the Autonomous Robotic Research Center is one of them, and is pushing towards applied robotics and for drones, underwaters, and navigation. So we tackle most of the problems. We also have a lot of nice collaborations with great university and companies. And I'm pretty sure you will hear more about us in the near future. Okay, so let me start from the very beginning of robotics, or at least what is a part of the robotics that really work very well. It's safe, it's reliable. Probably you have seen this picture of similar pictures in many talks where you know, everything is under control in the environment. It's a structured environment. So the robot knows what it has to do, can be pre-programmed for the job and reprogrammed for other jobs. And the hardware is very flexible, allows to reprogram the hardware for you know, different tasks, and everything works fine. Obviously, this part of the robotics is not considered intelligent because obviously the lack of cognitive reason, and you need to define all the variables very carefully. So what goes wrong when we don't have perception? Well, if you cannot perceive the environment, you cannot, you know, cope with the dynamic situations. You cannot adjust your behaviors, and that is very dangerous. In my opinion, safety or robustness comes from the ability to make predictions, the ability to understand what how our actions will affect the environment. And thanks to that, you can create a measurement of you know, of goodness of your actions, and if that actions lead you to a desired goal. To reinforce this point, I want to show you a couple of videos. One is two very well-known systems. One is the Atlas, where you can see do very nice operations like the backflip. And obviously, in this case, the control is important. So there is an open control loop probably there. We don't really know what Atlas does that, but we can imagine there is a open loop, very fast open loop control for doing these dynamics, for doing these motions, and then a very close, the closer with the feedback to recover the balance, for example, after it landed, like in this case. But in another system, like the one on your right hand, you can see like a robot manipulating objects. Now, in this system, control is not enough. You need a larger cycle that goes from perception, planning, and control. And that has to be embedded, has to be connected somehow, and robust and reliable. So as you can see in this system, the robot requires cameras a lot. It requires simulation environment. It requires planning. There are a lot more component ingredients that you need in order to have a manipulator that can actually manipulate everyday objects. Let me see if I can move forward. Okay. So what we really need for robot manipulation is the ability to map in perception interactions. These to close this loop through the planning and control. We needed to represent a complex task because fine manipulation obviously requires, or denser manipulation requires a lot of components. But also, well, we did have a lot to thank deep learning for, as has been mentioned, enable us to process images faster and things like that. But in robotics, especially for grasping, we know that we cannot collect a lot of data. So transfer skills is actually very beneficial because you can learn from some particular context and task, and then you can transfer this knowledge in different contexts. And that, I believe, is very useful. And then obviously, this is something that I like to do is a probabilistic representation of uncertainty, as has been mentioned also in the previous talks. And uncertainty, obviously, in robotics is tricky to deal with. Sequential decision making for complex tasks, and well, my focus is always stuff like this on robotic manipulation task and motor control. Okay, let's start from a work that, full disclosure, I didn't participate in, but it was almost ready when I joined the University of Birmingham for my PhD. And in this work, we built the Boris, so you can see the humanoid manual robots. And we figured out that basically grasp synthesis is actually easier than you can see on the image on your right-hand side that we have learned grasp for the first 4 objects here on the most left, and we transfer this grasp on the other objects that you can see on this table. And the idea was to take advantage of the context. So local context, local information about a demonstrated grasp. So we needed a teacher to tell us that that was a good grasp for that particular object. We extrapolate features on the object surface in order to generate some knowledge. But the nice thing is that can be done in one shot, because from the point cloud, for example, we can extrapolate enough statistics for each finger, for each context. And then when we see another object, in this case, we can see the train example here, and we take just one part of the finger, a link that is involved in this grasp, and we can see that we can infer on a completely different point cloud where this link would like to be. If you place the link in any of these red points, you will have a high score of similarity between the two contacts. And obviously, you can do that for all the links, and you can run some optimization tricks to optimize the grasp that you want to generalize. But it's very good in generalizing across different categories of objects. And when I started my PhD, I saw this and I tried to push forward, because grasp synthesis is actually very interesting, but it's a static image, or at least from the perspective, this algorithm is a static image. It does not take into account what's going to happen after you grasp, or the forces you apply to the object, or how to reach this object. And during my PhD, and maybe now Nathan remembers that since he was my external on my Viva. During my PhD, I worked on a very interesting case where one of the actually that's another thing. One of the problems that we had with this grasping algorithm was that it was failing, not because the grasp generated were wrong, because the position estimated by the vision algorithm was not precise enough or accurate enough. And so then, contact the object earlier or not reaching the object properly, generating a weaker grasp. So part of my PhD was basically trying to solve this. And I did that by starting with neuroscience research. It was I looked at this article from Christopoulos, sorry for the pronunciation. It was very interesting research. They took subject, they had shutter glasses, and they placed the subject in front of the robotic arm. The robotic arm was holding a cylinder they had to grasp. And in the first trial, the robot did not move. So the glasses were shutting and opening for 20 times, showing the same position of the object. And then with the shut eyes, they being asked to reach and grasp the cylinder. And you can see in the first results that the trajectory were quite a straight line to the target. The last one, the robot was moving, selecting a position from a random Gaussian, showing for 20 times 20 different positions of the object. And the user being asked to grasp it, not knowing where the object would have been. They only knew the object would have been in one of the 20 positions they have seen. And they integrate this uncertainty. You can see that the position, the trajectories that the participant have done with their finger actually cover a larger space. But very interesting is actually the middle results, which the robot was showing 20 different positions, but the participant knew that the robot would have stopped in the last position and left the object in that position. So they wouldn't have changed the position of the last object. So the participant actually knew where the object was, like in the first case. But since they have seen these 20 random positions coming from a Gaussian, the mind of the participant had integrated this uncertainty. So you can see that actually the trajectory of the participants are actually not as straightforward as in the case of no motion. And that it's very interesting because somehow that there is evidence that the brain integrates the uncertainties and it somehow integrates that in the motion since the very beginning. So we try to do the same, and we started from a very tough question actually. How do you represent pose uncertainty? This is actually not trivial what to answer, and most of the work before my thesis have just sampled some Gaussian, fixed Gaussian that were given. What I tried to do was to provide a better way of defining this uncertainty, and I've done that by if you have a point cloud geometric information about an object, and then you see again this object, you can try to do some match scanning algorithm in order to try to figure out the pose. If you repeat this several times, you can have many different poses, because this kind of match scanning are typically probabilistic, so they sample random points in the point cloud. So you can see that these blue are all different poses that the machine scanning algorithm came out with. And you can see there are several, so, there is translation uncertainty, there's a lot of rotation uncertainty in many cases where the envelope of this mag is actually placed in a different position. The white point cloud is actually the ground truth. So what once we have generated in this way this pose uncertainty, what we have done was to generate an hypothesis-based planning. So I wanted to integrate the planning into the I wanted to integrate the uncertainty into the planning of the trajectory. And fortunately, I was not the very first one to think about this kind of approach. Robert Platt came out actually a year before that, before I started that. But I know I have the blessing of Robert when I say that I have improved a bit further this approach, because Robert was only defining the target position in this way, while I was able to integrate the uncertainty within the path line in the joint space of a robot R in a very efficient way. What I was doing, I was planning trajectory that were maximizing the information gain. And here is an example. On the left, you can see two hypotheses where the mag could be. And I know that if I plan a trajectory and I will eat the two objects in that following this trajectory, the expected contact signals will arrive mostly at the same time and will make very hard to distinguish the two. In the other case, obviously, I get a lot of information, and I wanted to some results that were actually not expected was that in this case, the success rate at the first grasp attempt was actually doubled on the path plan that was generating the information gain. So even if it was designed to gather more information, changing the trajectory since the very beginning, generate more robust trajectory, we're actually able to grasp at the first attempt. And I can see, I think I ran out of minutes, but I would like just to conclude with this slide. The main point of this slide is that the one-shot learning for content so that you can transfer to different objects and across environment, and planning trajectories on the fly very efficiently, and taking into account integrating the uncertainty. These two methods together can be very useful to make predictions and to use it as a database to expect what's going to happen. And we have done the same in different applications. We use the same approach in different applications in order to be able to push objects of shapes we never saw in order to make predictions of where the object would have moved. It would have been like rough prediction, but just to give an idea, sometimes that is actually more than enough when we don't have a lot of the physical information, for example, for push manipulation. We have used for Mayo control, because if you can make prediction about the motion that the user wants to do, and so the user intention, it doesn't matter which kind of algorithm you use for my control, they typically suffer of a lot of problems, because they sweat and the sensor moves and people get fatigue while controlling, so the signal actually change. And the state-of-the-art approach relies on the user to go back in the lab and get to retrain, while our algorithm, for example, could be used for identify these moments, and also for assistance calibration, where, for example, nuclear environment, if you have to do nuclear waste disposal, you can use AI assistance that is able to understand your intention, because you can make prediction about trajectory given the context and the environment.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Claudio, for your presentation. It's very nice. So yeah, we'll keep questions at the end of the first half.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
okay. So next presentation is from Dr. Mehmet Dogar. He's associate professor at the School of Computing at the University of Leeds. Mehmet, if you are ready, please, to share your slides. We cannot hear you. You're muted.
You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
But now you can see my slides. All right.
Yes. No.
Everything good now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So hello, everyone. My name is Mehmet Dogar. Yeah, as Uriel introduced me, I will skip that part, but my research is in robotic manipulation planning, similar to Claudio. And I will talk about our recent work in our group. Our main focus in our group is really a physical interaction with objects. And when I say physical interaction, one good example problem is these kind of manipulation and clutter scenes that we address in our group. So where, for example, here the robot's task, let's say, is to grasp this object with the green tape on it, and then the robot needs to push through this clutter where multiple objects will be interacting with each other, and so the robot needs to predict how those objects, all these objects will be moving as the robot is pushing on them, and go reach the target object. And as we do this, we are motivated by problems of manipulation clutter, where, for example, reaching into a fridge where the robot will need to push through objects to grasp them, or manipulation in warehouses where robots need to reach into shelves to grasp items from among multiple other objects. And that is more the motivation from the application side, but from the more science side, what we are motivated by is really moving beyond geometric motion planning. And when Uriel sent me the information about this workshop, he said, this is about looking 10 years ago, and 10 years after that, which is now, like, where did we come from and where we are going in manipulation. And I think, one thing, like, other than, of course, the important implications of deep learning in manipulation, one other thing that was very different from 10 years back was 10 years ago, when we talked about manipulation planning, motion planning, we were mostly talking about collision-free motion planning. And 10 years ago, RRT's motion planning in the sense of avoiding contact with obstacles was really the problem. But now we are mostly trying to move beyond that by thinking of physics-based interaction and contacts during motion planning. And that is the context that we do our work in, and I will briefly mention some recent work in our group, 3 of them in this talk. And the first one will be about online planning for manipulation clutter. And this, again, goes back basically 10 years ago. That is where it starts. 10 years ago, I was doing my PhD, basically. So the year was 2011, exactly 10 years ago. So that's good. And what I was looking at was, as I said, back then, manipulation planning was mostly about planning grasps, putting your fingers on the object, picking it up, doing collision-free motion planning, placing it somewhere. So this pick and place manipulation and doing sequences of that was most of where the focus was. And I was trying to ask the question, like, as we are grasping the object, actually, when the robot's fingers make contact with the object moves. It slides on the surface. So can we model that slide? And if we model that slide, can we actually then use it to our advantage to slide it even more? And so basically, I was looking at models that can predict how the object moves when the robot fingers make contact with it during the grasp. That would help, for example, push objects away from other obstacles to help grasp. It would also help with uncertainty. If your camera had uncertainty about where an object was, then we could correct that by pushing and funneling that uncertainty in. So that was part of what I did. And then moreover, then we were looking at doing this not only for the object that we want to grasp, but also motion planning where we can contact the obstacles and then predict how the obstacles will move so that we can push them out of the way. So here's an example where the robot wants to grasp that red can, and it is predicting how all those 3 cans will move as the robot contacts with them and finds motion where it will push the obstacle objects out of the way. Now, though one aspect of this work during my PhD was that this was following on the collision-free motion planning tradition, because in collision-free motion planning, what you do is you detect the objects, you plan a grasp, and then you do collision-free motion planning, and then you do open loop execution. You just close the robot's eyes and execute that motion. These actions were all based on open loop execution. Once the robot made its plan, it would just close its eyes and execute. One consequence of this was that it wasn't able to deal with high amounts of clutter. So you won't ever see in these videos where the robot is pushing an object and that object is contacting another object and is pushing it. Okay, so because that was increasing uncertainty about the physical interaction too much for open loop execution to be successful. So what I mean by that is, for example, those kind of flags weren't applicable in this kind of scenes where if you're reaching and pushing something, pushing an object, it will definitely go and contact another object. You won't have space to just push a single object on its own. So if you try to do open loop execution in these kind of scenes, what happens is that let's say you have this scene in your simulation, you do the plan, and you reach the goal object. But if you actually try to execute in such high clutter scenes, the physics never evolve like your simulation evolves, because there's so many interactions between the objects and there's so many unknown parameters that your physics simulation is bound to be very much different from the actual physics, how the actual physics evolve. So with my student Wisdom Agro, what we have been looking at has been applying online planning or model predictive control to these kind of problems to basically detect when the physics starts evolving differently than the predicted solutions, and then adapting the motion using trajectory optimization approaches, basically to make small and fast changes to the plan so that we can actually then execute actions in such scenes with high clutter where multiple objects contact each other. Now, one problem though with these approaches was that they tend to be slow, because these approaches rely on multiple simulations, physics simulations of these high number of objects, and physics simulations are computationally very expensive, and therefore that was our main bottleneck. So when we started thinking about how to address that, we started thinking about combining learning and planning, which is the second thing I will talk about, where we said, okay, instead of when we simulate forward, we usually simulate forward until the end goal, and this yellow arrow here represents that, and that takes too much computational time. And we said, can we actually plan only until a short horizon instead of all the way until the end? But then how do we know if, when we plan until a short horizon, how do we know if that state, the resulting state, is a good state? Well, maybe we can learn approximations to the values of those states, right? We can learn approximations to the value function. And so that is something that we did. For example, in this work, here the robot is trying to push this orange to this target region. And what you see here is it's planning only with a short horizon, not until the goal. And then it actually extracts this image representation and feeds it into a neural network that then gives us approximate values of the states at the short horizon, so that the robot can pick actions according to those predicted short horizon values. Recently, Wissam, our student, extended this to also searching for occluded objects, not only pushing objects. But here, for example, we can ask the robot to retrieve a certain object, and now the camera is on the robot's hand, and the oil bottle that the robot is looking for, it can't be seen right now. It is hidden because it is behind some of these objects. And the robot now also has a model of the hidden regions. And the neural network in this case not only predicts the value of the states at the short horizon, but also you will see green objects appearing here. The neural network also learns to predict where the hidden object may be within that space, and proposes hypotheses about where that object may be, and depending on that, the planner tries to achieve that object, that hypothesized object, by the neural network, and so that it can go and find these objects. So we were able to merge the value state approximation with the predictions about where the hidden objects may be in such scenes. Now, both of these approaches that I talked about use trajectory optimization, and one problem that we had with these methods were that
So welcome back, everybody. Now we will resume with the second part of the workshop, and the very first talk will be, I don't know if Dingo, are you here?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I'm here.
So, perfect. So
Yeah.
the next talk will be shared control of a robotic arm using brain
I'm
computer.
here.
Will be, yes, shared control of a robotic arm using brain-computer interfaces and robotic vision from Dingo Zhang. Dr. Dingo Zhang is a robotic engineer. He's a co-director of the Center of Autonomous Robotics on the Department of Electrical Engineering, the University of Bath, and has several research interests that include rehabilitation robots, human-machine interfaces, and brain-computer interfaces. So whenever you are ready, please, looking forward to your talk.
Okay. I share my screen. Can you hear the slide?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Today I give a talk, set control of a robotic arm using brain-computer interface and robotic vision. My name is Dingo Zhang. I'm working in Center for Autonomous Robotics, University of Bath. At first, I give the definition for the keyword, brain-computer interface, BCI. BCI is a communication and control system that uses signals generated in the brain and does not depend on peripheral nerves or muscles. In fact, we can use some EEG device or other brain measurement to collect brain signals. We can use some advanced machine learning algorithms to decode human motion intention and control the external devices such as robotic arm, wheelchair, and drone, and other robotic devices. The brain-actuated robotic arm system is an important topic in the BCI applications, which can help paralyzed patients regain independent capability in daily life. So in previous research, we may find some very amazing and excellent research that were published in Nature Science. Actually, they use invasive BCI. The electrodes are implanted in the brain of the patients, so the performance is very, very good. In general, there are two types of BCI. Non-invasive BCI is safe, simple, convenient, and low cost. However, the performance is poor. Another kind of BCI is invasive BCI. It's of high risk, impractical, complex. It may have some ethical issues, and it has high cost, but the performance is good. So we hope to use non-invasive BCI based on EEG signals, electroencephalography signals. But we know because of the noise, it had poor performance. How can we solve this problem? So some researchers, include us, proposed the idea set control. The motivation, the performance of non-invasive BCIs may not be satisfactory due to the poor quality of EEG signals. So the set control can be used as an alternative solution. In fact, we hope to use BCI brain computer interface to be combined with autonomous robotic control. The alternative object is to merge the human intelligence and the machine intelligence. This is the long-term goal. In fact, there are some available shared control strategies in brain-controlled robotic arm. Here, I give some examples. In fact, in my previous research, we have used shared control to get good performance for robotic arm. Okay, we can look at the video. We have proposed the cascade shared control and parallel shared control for the brain-actuated robotic arm. The left side is BCI control, pure BCI control. The right side is shared control. We can find the performance is improved much. The time is less. The accuracy is increased for the robotic arm control. This is our previous research. However, there are still some problems. Most of the existing shared control methods, we should set the arbitration rules manually. It highly depends on specific tasks and developers' experience. There are some challenges how to allocate the authority between machine and the human automatically, how to dynamically adjust the autonomy assistance based on the working condition in real-time control. In order to solve these problems, we make some improvement in our research. We put a novel shared control method that automatically optimizes the control commands in a dynamic way based on the context in real-time control. Besides, we employed the hybrid BCI to better allocate the commands with multiple functions. The system allowed non-invasive BCI based on EEG to manipulate a robotic arm moving in a 3D space and complete a pick place task of multiple objects, maybe 4 to 5 objects, and even more objects can be used in such system. This is the structure of the system. This side, the left side, is the BCI system. We use hybrid BCI. It contains two paradigms, motor imagery and SSVP. The right side is the robotic system. We use camera to realize vision-based robotic arm control. The autonomous robotic control system use pose estimation, target prediction, and it can realize the assistance, including auto place, auto grasp. It can also correction the command from the human. We use a method, Bayesian fusion method, to realize the shared control. This is the general structure of the system. For BCI, we use hybrid BCI. Actually, it has two paradigms. SSVP, steady state video evoked potential paradigm. It should use the video stimuli, and in fact, it's a non-independent BCI because the subject should look at the flashing box on a screen, and the video stimuli should be used to generate the better performance. Another paradigm in the hybrid BCI is motor imagery. This is an intuitive paradigm. The subject just imagine left or right hand motion, all in two classes. Okay, the two methods are combined in the hybrid BCI. The SSVP control the movement in XY plane, and the MI multi-imagery paradigm control the vertical movement of the end effector of the robotic arm. Okay, this is the protocol for BCI part. SSVP, okay, look at here. Actually, this is the screen of a computer. There are some flashing blocks. Okay, in this screen, there are four flashing blocks, which indicate 4 directions. The green bar indicates the MI paradigm, multi-imagery, left side or right side imagination. For the BCI subsystem, okay, we use 2 types. The first type is to identify the user's current BCI paradigm, SSVP or MI. The second type, we use some algorithms for SSVP filter band canonical method or FBCCA for SSVP decoder. For MI decoder, we use CSP common spatial patterns. For feature extraction, we use LDA as a classifier to classify the motion up and down for the end effector. For the robot subsystem, we use a camera and we use a UR5 robot. In fact, the autonomous control is based on the vision guided control. Vision guided. We should complex objects identification, pose estimation, knowledge base update, and then we generate the shared control assistance. It includes auto placement, auto grasp, motion correction. In fact, these technologies are mature, and we just use some available methods. For example, fully convolutional networks I've seen is used in robotic system. It includes some steps for visual perception. It's knowledge base, and we can get accuracy above 90%. Pose estimation, okay. The index of green announced map and point cloud scene, which was scanned at the same time, one-to-one correspondence. So we can cut the target point cloud directly by taking the green annotation map result as reference. And then the index of the green annotation map and point cloud scene, which was scanned at the same time as one-to-one correspondence. So we can cut the target point cloud directly by taking the green annotation map result as reference. Also, we should to accomplish user's intense inference for the robotic system. Only taking distance as a fusion standard of shared control sometimes cannot provide reasonable assistance in actual conditions. So we use probability distribution over trajectories. This is the detail for the probability distribution over trajectories. I will not give the details. This slide is important. This is the shared control strategy, the schema for the shared control strategy. Look at the cylinder, the green cylinder area. Actually, this is the reaching correction region, the green cylinder. In this region, the robotic arm, the autonomous control will correct the command from the BCI. Outside the cylinder, actually, BCI, the brain computer control is in charge, and the weight for the brain computer interface is larger outside the cylinder region. But in the cylinder region, the autonomous robotic control, the vision-based control, the weight is higher. The sphere, the red sphere actually is the automatic grasp regions. In this region, the robotic system, the vision-based control will be dominant. We use Bayesian fusion theory to realize the shared control. Due to arbitrary direction of the robotic arm in each control cycle, the prior probabilities of H, M, and C were uniform distributions. The meaning for H, M, C are given, and there are too many details. I will not give all the explanations due to the time limitation. Here is the NA factor of the robot. Actually, it had two motion angles, alpha and beta. Alpha and beta actually are commands based on a maximum posterior probability map. Highlights the set control utilized probabilistic fusion to optimize the motion command, where did not require to preset the rules based on the empiricism. The offline BCI performance of each subject and the real-time confidence score of infrared user's intention were taken into account in online control, guaranteeing the arbitration was indeed contextual. It dynamically allocated authorities depending on the individual characteristic and the actual control situation. This is the setup of the experiment. We do some offline calibration for BCI. For online control, actually it had two processes, pick process and the place process. For pick process, the server control was used. For place process, all-in BCI was used. We want to compare the performance between pick process and place process. This is the system, the subject, the robotic arm, and the camera. Okay. Here, I give some offline results of the BCI. Okay, I will not talk too much on this slide. Notable ERD was observed in both hybrid MI and pure BCI, pure MI tasks. So the simultaneous or feasible of the hybrid schema is validated from these figures. This slide is important. We check the result. For the pick process, for the pick process, set control is used. We can find the success rate is much higher than the place process, because in place process, all-in pure BCI is used. Okay, we can find the set control outperforms the pure BCI control. Also, we can compare the trajectory efficiency rate, TER. We find the set control has better TER than pure BCI control. Also, the workload for set control is lighter than that of pure BCI control. We can watch the video. Picking process set control is used to grasp a task. It's more efficient. Then place process BCI control is used. All-in BCI control, pure BCI control. It's time consuming. It indicates the shared control outperform the pure BCI control from the video. Also, I give some examples of failed cases. Collision, place fail. Okay, thank you for your attention. I finished my presentation. If you want to find more details, you can read this paper. Also, you can contact me in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. First of all, do we have any questions from the audience? I don't see any messages. So I have a question in regarding this. So two, in fact. One is, how much of training was necessary in order for the participants to achieve the control given the BCI?
We just do some training in offline stage. Maybe 8 trials for SSV, 20 trials for MI, about 10 to 20 minutes, 10 minutes, about 10 minutes. For BCI, we need some training. Yeah.
Okay, so then the training was offline and then right?
Yeah, then we perform online test. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would be the difference there, let's say, of the performance if it would be like a shared control or a semi-autonomous, for example, control of the robotic arm?
You mean the comparison of the performance?
Yeah, I mean,
shared control and pure BCI.
I mean, now that was like a shared control, and then you have like the performance between like a shared control and a pure BCI control, and then would you like some other approaches like a semi-autonomous, for example, control, or would there be any like differences or disadvantages or advantages with other approaches? I mean, apart from the shared control one.
For the robotic part, we only use the vision-based autonomous control. We did not try other method of autonomous robotic control. So I don't know the difference, but vision-based robotic arm control is the most popular one at present. So I use it in my research. Nice. But in future, maybe we can try other methods. Actually, there are many different autonomous robotic arm control methods. Yeah. Currently, I cannot tell the difference which is better or worse. Yeah.
But that's great work, and I think I know several people who would be very interested in your work. So yeah, very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions, or we move to before we move to the next presenter? Okay. So the next presenter, it's a pleasure to present, is Lorenzo Cominelli. We've had the opportunity to collaborate a few years back with a European project called EASL. So he's going to present Face and Abel, Emotions, Personality in Human-Robot Interaction. And well, Lorenzo, he's in biomedical engineering. He has a PhD in information engineering, and now he's a postdoc researcher in the Piaggio Research Center. Mainly, his focuses are in AI, in cognitive systems, and for social robots. And he's significantly contributed in the design of the face robot, which you will see soon. So, Lorenzo, thank you very much for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you for the invitation, for the talk. Can you hear me? Can you see everything?
Yes, excellent.
Okay. So you already present myself, so I start presenting a robot. I will talk about these topics: emotions, personality, and trust in human-robot interaction, using these use cases of these two robots. I hope I have the time also to present Abel, which is our new humanoid robot of the center. Anyway, let's start from Face. So Face is a humanoid. As you can see, is made by David Hansen, the mechatronics. So you can consider her as as an older sister of Sophia. It's an acronym, facial automaton for conveying motion. It has a 3D printed skull designed to host the servo motors moving the genoid expression, which is made. The facial expression, the facial material is the flubber. So it's a skin-like material to reproduce the mechanical behavior and aesthetics of the human skin. And the study of the movement of the facial expression is based on the Paul Ekman's facial action coding system. So the motors are grouped and moved to perform the movements of the action units of the face. As Vicky said, initially a face was used in therapy, so in associations, to create associations between expressions and emotions in autism spectrum therapy. And it was involved in the EASL European project, in which she plays the role of synthetic tutor assistant in the educational scenarios. Anyway, face is not able only to express the emotions through the facial expressions, but also to detect some social cues in a social environment. Here you can see a software that we developed, which is called the Scene Analyzer, that is able to extract, using different modules of image analysis, some social cues from the environment. As you can see here, you have the paper to go deeper in these details. Anyway, what the robot really see, I mean, the input for the cognitive system is not the image itself, but an integration of all this information. As you can see here, I highlighted the speaking probability, for example, of the subject, which is given by an algorithm. Another is the calculation of the facial expression, so facial expression recognition, even in percentage of probability. And I mean, the KNet given the coordinates, three-dimensional coordinates of the joints, and like, for example, this left hand here, and so on. So the focus here is on what to do with this kind of information. And that if we have this pre-processing by sensors and by the analysis of this raw information from the environment, what to do then with this information. We rely here on expert systems, which are what they are. I mean, they are a computer system typically used to emulate the decision-making ability of a human expert, so to replicate an expertise, but also used as decision-making support. And they are designed to solve complex problems by reasoning through bodies of knowledge, the chunk of knowledge that are rules. So it's a rule-based system, and is represented, this knowledge, in these if-then rules, rather than through conventional procedural code. So typically you have, in the older version, a human user giving facts as a system, this knowledge base made of rules that process the facts given by the user, and an inference engine that manage the execution of these rules. And the system giving back an expertise. Why I'm talking about this? Because a single rule, how is it made? You have a left-hand side and a right-hand side. So you have conditions or antecedents and actions or consequence. The conditions are linked by a logical AND, so that they have to be all true to activate and to trigger the rule. And the condition can be on the presence of facts in the factual knowledge of the robots, or condition about these facts, if, for example, it has some numerical values. Then the actions, if the rule then is followed by the system, would be procedural, meaning that there is a list of actions to be performed. I'm doing this distinction because the rule itself is just an individual chunk of knowledge that is in the system and is not in a procedural order. So how to create an order in this kind of system? Among the actions that can be performed by the rule, there are the creation of new facts, so assertion of new facts, or modification of existing facts. So actually, a right-hand side can trigger the left-hand side of another rule. Here is just the syntax. You can see facts and actions. So graphically, we can consider this as this like big complex neuron, which has nothing to do with a biological neuron, but some similarities. For example, you have you need to have simultaneously these conditions to activate the rule, and the rule fire a list of actions, as I said before. And among this list of actions, there can be a link to another rule. And this is how we do the design of reasoning chains, so inference. So this pass of facts is called dummy facts, and you can do modification of structure of facts, and you can, as you can see, You can have some complex reasoning, so involving more rules, or some more direct reasoning, passing from some known facts to conclusion. An absence of a fact can be an input, and a created fact, an asserted fact, can also be not something that activates another rule, but just something that becomes new secondary information. Okay, that's it. So what is interesting in this kind of systems is that you can do forward and backward chaining. So you can reason from the facts to the conclusion, or in reverse. So from a potential conclusion, so an hypothesis to be proved, and let's say ask for the facts that support the hypothesis. Another thing is that you can do deterministic inference, so take the fact for true or not, as well as the rule, but you can also apply some probabilistic inference, like Bayesian inference, and use some, for example, like here, the certainty factor of the facts, or some likelihood of necessity or likelihood of sufficiency to activate a rule inside the inference. So we thought that an expert system was good to be embedded in a cognitive system. Why? For this representation of knowledge, the fact of doing these reasoning chains, the flexibility under uncertainty, because you can manage also some fuzzy logic, some uncertain or not completely true fact. So you can, for example, receive some information that is not completely sure. And the standard understandability also is very important. So you have the explainability of investigating. You can stop the system and investigate the steps of the reasoning. And for the high performance and the adequate response time, which is mostly given by the Rete algorithm, which is underneath the system. So is it good for everything? Of course, no. This is good for high-level reasoning, so for the symbolic manipulation of the concepts that are extracted from the environment. So the general idea is to use the synergy between a machine learning approach and an expert system. But here you can, I mean, this is a simplification. You can read all everything is data driven and everything is knowledge based in a sequence, meaning that from the real world, we have raw data, we process this data to do what? To do feature extraction, to do classification, categorization. And then when we have this pre-processed information, we can use such kind of system to do abstract reasoning, emotion processing, and contextual decisions. So this is what we did it, and this is part of the phase architecture control, and it's the PEM block. As you can see, the meta scene, so the integrated file that I showed before, goes inside the system and is processed in parallel by different modules, so by different set of rules deputed to the attention, to the emotion representation in the robots. So, for example, you can see that we have a decision about a point to look at, for example, a person to look at, and we have as output also these two parameters. This is like motion responsive complex spaces. So we have this regulates the expression of the robot. This is the mood. So why we split into these two parameters? Because we try to replicate this difference between emotions and feelings that we have. So emotions are these quick reactions and almost not controlled reaction on the context that we are living. So the first one will execute some expressions and micro expressions in the robot, while the second one would be used as an internal value that has not to be necessarily expressed immediately by the robot, but can bias the behavior. And how? We took inspiration from neuroscience, especially from the Antonio Damasio's theory of minds, and we implement a sort of somatic marker for the robot. So we use some thresholds in the emotional processing of the robot to understand if some event, some inducer of emotions bring the emotional state of the robot out of some thresholds to create associations and bias the behavior. We test these in a real scenario of human-robot interaction using this experiment that I call, as a joke, the good, the bad, and the evil, meaning that three persons are behaving differently and biased to the robots, like kindly, more gently or not, or with mixed behavior to test if some markers emerge in the mind of the robot, as you can see here, exceeding some thresholds. It can happen also that the threshold is not reached, so no marker appears. And we see some biased behavior in the attention and the expressions of the robot. So this is a good start point to work with. And another topic is trust, so which is obviously very important in social interaction, so also with interaction with social robots. And we find that it's very important to collaborate, for example, with behavioral economicists. In this case, we replicate a variation of the trust game, which is an economic game that, to summarize, I mean, the best choice for both players here is the collaborative choice. So the player A choosing in, and the other one rolling the dice to see what happens in pricing. With the probability. So what emerged from this study, testing different embodiment, different types of player B, so face, a human replicating face, and a simple computer box, is that the promising, this is the variation of Charles, to put a dialogue before, so to promise what the robot will do. The promise is affected from the robot only when people rate the robot with high human likeness and the interaction with the human likeness. Another result is that also the let's say the psychophysiological arousal during the interaction is something that triggered the decision, and is present only with the human and humanoid aesthetics, let's say. Another work that we are approaching, and which is ongoing, is something about the personality. And we found this theory that we like so much because this is taken from psychologists, the cognitive affective processing system from Michel Shoda. And we like because it's a bottom-up approach. So they, let's say, instead of taking just the personality traits as they are, they try to unveil the black box of the person. So to understand how some cognitive affective units are mediated and interact among them to produce a behavior. And they put a focus on the situation and on the person to understand also this behavioral variability inside similar personalities. And this is, by an implementation point of view, something that we like, also because we already have this kind of setup. So we did this feature extraction, and this kind of processing system is really suitable to be implemented with the system. And this is what we are doing now in collaboration with psychologists. We're trying to design and then to evaluate in real scenarios personalities implemented in the robot using these cows networks. These patterns of activation, so the indications about how to design these patterns would be extracted by the analysis of interviews about what the people think about the internal processes of, for example, a known person. So to conclude, I would just want to present this new robot, which is Abel, and is made in collaboration with Gustav Hogan, which is the animatronic genius of biomimics, and he's dedicated purely to the mechatronics. And not so much time for Abel, so just to stress the importance also to involving this kind of professional figures, very different from us. So they work mainly with cinema, and they create with these fantastic creators also in the movies, and they know very well how to create these agents that invoke strong emotional feelings in the observers, in the human observers. Okay, my time is finished, so I leave you with these new objectives with Abel. So principally the integration of affective computing devices, trying to, let's say, having a more reliable assessment of the emotional state of the human interlocutor, the integration of novel algorithms, so facial emotional recognition, natural language processing, attention models, studies on trust, and the generation of moral decision using the emotional reaction of the interlocutor as a reinforcement learning to understand which actions of the robots are good for the others. And also studies on verbal communications, like because that we did not with face. Here we have also the possibility to use some lip sync and mouth movements also, which is very reliable. To combine believable body gestures, studying velocity profile to replicate some human-like movements, and the generation of adaptation of this personality. The application of ABLE would be in the context of impaired emotional appraisal and expression. So as in the case of conduct disorders and Alzheimer's, for example. Thank you.
Very, 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 very nice talk. So I also see a lot of links from things that also Tobias said about the need for an architecture that would
yeah, of course,
host all of this. So because I have so many questions, before I ask anything, if anyone has any questions from the audience?
I have a question. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, it's actually related to your question that you asked in the previous session. So first, I wonder if this robot, this humanoid, has tactile sensors, because it's another non-verbal communication channel. Is there any plan to include tactile sensors? Or
yes, we are planning to do this. We have some colleagues of mine in the same research center that are working on using, for example, some ink-made conductive strips on the skin of the robots to understand, for example, not only like a proprioception of the body, but also some kind of different touch. Because of course, it is very difficult to have this tactile interaction with this kind of robot. But it's super interesting to, if we can, for example, realize how the people approach also to this kind of robots, because when you have so much motor, so much complex structure, it is very difficult to understand this kind of things. So yes, this is a problem. Yeah.
How this could affect or impact on the trust or this communication between the human and the robot, and maybe the robot also could learn to do certain reactive behaviors or something like that.
Just thinking about, we are writing actually a proposal with the University of Cardiff with an ex-colleague of mine to study trust in these two very different contexts, which is social trust and which is physical trust, let's say. So they do different studies using, for example, motion tracking of people approaching a robotic arm like a cobot to understand, for example, if after misfunction the people do not trust anymore the robot or are approaching a different way physically to the robot. So also not just a matter of touching the robot, but also how you approach to it.
Yeah. Definitely. Okay, thank you.
Great.
Can I go for questions? Ciao Lorenzo. I wanted to ask you about how much machine learning is involved in this part of the field, and how much is actually heuristic. In a sense that, for example, you want to understand, you wanted to understand to detect facial expression of feelings and stuff like that.
Is machine
and that is,
of course, yeah.
And that machine learning. But after that, in the stage after that, when you try to use that to learn, for example, how to compensate for a situation that made the participant said, it maybe a behavior that was from the robot, or how you will follow up with the interaction. Is that based on heuristics? There is some machine learning that you're aware of, or I'd like to understand a bit better what are the techniques there.
Yes, so this is one of the main points, one of the main problems, because when you do this kind of system, you always have to to distinguish, let's say, a low and a high level, but always in a high level, you need the techniques of the low level, let's say. So this is a big problem. We are trying to keep the things separated. So this means that there should be nothing mathematical, let's say, in the heuristic part, but it cannot be. And so, yes, we need, for example, some learning in the interaction. So that there is no one of these two sides is more important than another. So the terms, for example, that I used before, like low or high level, are just knowns. But I would say 50-50, and it is very difficult to have a split between these two words.
I have a quick question. If I'm eating into my own time of the talk, so I think it's fine.
We have some time, so please do.
Ciao, Lorenzo. I wanted to ask, for the first study that you mentioned with FACE with autistic children, whether, since for Sophia this was a well-known thing, whether you noticed any uncanny valley issues with the autistic children, whether they were reported any.
So actually there we have a different situation about this uncanny valley thing, because I think the uncanny valley is something very general, no? So it's something you see a fake human, you feel the shivers. But in many applications, first of all, I have an idea which is not personal, but is shared with other roboticists and social roboticists, which is that emotional reaction has to be exploited, meaning that you see something, you feel something, so we have to work on it. So we don't have to, let's say, stop using this kind of robot or change completely this kind of agents. And this is just a general idea. So going more specific with autistic children are obviously intelligent. So they are clearly understand that thing is not a human. And this is a big advantage in this kind of situation, because they don't have, and this has been measured with like wearable sensors, they don't have, let's say, the problems that they have with real people. And the therapy becomes more effective because they have more eye contact with the robot. The robot has this replicated performance. I mean, it's never tired of to perform these facial expressions. So in that context, it is better. It is better even than a human, like an actor, for example, for which they could have some emotional problems to share the same environment and the same interaction. So I hope I answered your question.
Well, I mean, almost, because also my beginning of my studies were with autistic children, but with more simple humanoid robots, but not so realistic in terms of the face. So mine was exactly for that, because also, for instance, Ishiguro's Geminoids tend to sometimes trigger because they look very humanoid until they start moving. And that kind of dissonance is what I meant for the uncanny valley, specifically for very, very humanoid with very, very realistically facial expressions. But I agree that for autistic children, having humanoid robots that offer way less cues than a person would is a huge help. And that's kind of like the first 5 minutes of my talk.
Yeah, I will add also that in that context, we use a super controlled environment. So we don't leave any autonomy for the robot. So the robot was just as pictures are used, as avatars are used, as let's say a representation of the motions after, for example, the presentation of a task or a presentation of a situation, and to represent these emotions physically for the importance clearly of the physical embodiments having this kind of scenarios. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So actually, this is a great opportunity to introduce Anna because Anna will be presenting a very interesting talk that I'm actually very looking forward to hear about interesting motivation and adaptation, the dynamic duo of the cognitive human-robot interaction. And just to say a little bit about Anna, well, Anna has been working at the Italian Institute of Technology and took their PhD in bioengineering and robotics. And actually their main interests, which are very interesting for me as well, is cognitive robotics, its adaptation in human-robot interaction, and socially assistive robots. So like these two last talks are extremely relevant to each other and a very nice way to also close the conference. So Anna, when you're ready.
Thank you, Vicky. Actually, I feel like super lucky because given Tobias's talk and also Lorenzo's talk, I don't have to explain any new concepts, so I can. A lot of it will resonate with Lorenzo's talk, so that's perfect. Like the first.
They fit very well.
Yes, excellent. Let me just share the screen. Okay. So I'll try to keep an eye on the time, but please ping me in case I'm getting beyond the 15 minutes. Okay, so anyways, thank you, Vicky, for the introduction. I'm Anna Tanevska. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Italian Institute of Technology at the Contact Unit, which is the Cognitive Architectures for Collaborative Technologies. I've been with this unit for the last 2 years with my postdoc, but I did my PhD with the RBCS unit with Giulia Sandini. And currently I'm working under the ERC-funded project Whisper under the supervision of Dr. Alessandra Sciutti. So before continuing on to what I've been doing in Italy and IIT, I will very quickly give background, structuring it in the living machine spirit of what's been done in the last decade. So of my work in the bachelor and master. So by profession or by education, I'm a computer scientist and engineer, but my first work in robotics was actually more in the field of socially assistive robotics. So starting with my bachelor studies, I explored the field of robot-assisted therapy for autistic children. And so as also Lorenzo was saying before in their discussion, this is a very, in my opinion, very rewarding field because it offers, while you still get to have interaction with the robot, you also can see real time how the robot can be used as a tool for therapeutical, but also educational purposes. In my study with the Neuro-Robot and with a group of autistic children under the age of 10, we did 2 months of interaction with the Neuro-Robot where the robot performed a series of exercises with the children that they had been doing before with their therapist on a regular weekly basis. The study was very, very obvious with the same results that all of the robot-assisted therapy studies have, which is that the children really had an increase in their interest and interactivity while doing the exercises with the robot. And we measured roughly how the robot influenced the time and dedication that they had for the exercises. All of the children at the end of the 2 months, we noticed a very nice increase in their interactivity and communication, both with the robot, but also with the therapist and myself, which were always present there. And also a decrease in the time that the children took to perform the exercises, not in the sense that they did less of them, but in the sense that they did them more consistently and without any kind of breaks, but they were actually interested to do the different kind of exercises. During this study, I noticed that, well, of course, as most robot-assisted therapy studies, we had to do it Wizard of Oz style. So the robot had the pre-programmed exercises, but it was me essentially running the robot in the background, depending on the advice from the therapist on which exercises to perform. And it was at this point that I started becoming interested in the question of autonomy in human-robot interaction. So can the robot actually perform something like this, some kind of educational interaction or therapeutical interaction by itself? And this segued into my master thesis research, where I started exploring autonomous child-robot interaction. The group of children in case was neurotypical, for my master thesis, but it was the first time that I actually dabbled a bit into self-learning and autonomous robots in HRI. So the study defined in my thesis covered more into more discrete and probabilistic approach of using Markov chains and using a self-evaluating, let's say, algorithm. The algorithm in question was based, however, on internal states, so on some kind of intrinsic motivation, which for the robot was represented by pseudo emotional states. So the robot's emotional states of being happy or sad or neutral changed in responding to how the children were interested in the interaction. So this was just a very, very brief background on how I ended up then at IIT. So this really sparked my interest in cognition. What I knew was that I was interested in human-robot interaction, and I was interested in how robots can definitely be autonomous, but also personalizing, so learn more about each of the people, be it children or adults, it's interacting with. So this segued into my PhD at the Italian Institute of Technology at the RBCS lab. So giving also a bit of a background on the lab itself, what we are interested in is really intuitive and perspective robots that can communicate in a social and adaptive way. And what we do over the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years of the two departments that are now Contact and RBCS has been studying the dual role of the robot in HRI. So both as a communicator and as a reader. So the robot in question is ICAB, and already previous speakers mentioned it. So I will not focus a lot on it, but some of the studies that we have done in the past years have covered, on one hand, the role of the robot as a communicator, so how it can implicitly, by using covert communication, like its movements, convey some signals and also some information. Here you can see the work of Alessandra on communicating the object's weight, which in turn allows for a prediction on what the robot will use the object for. This in particular is a study on the different intentions for the robot, judging by the grasp. So whether the robot is grasping the object, the bottle in this question, to pour or to drink. And participants were tested on estimating the weight of the object and also whether they can guess what will the next action of the robot be. Along the line of using the robot as a communicator, there is also the work of Fabio Vanucci and in collaboration with Di Cesare from the University of Parma on the style of robot actions. So on whether people are sensitive to what kind of emotions or what kind of action style the robot is conveying, whether it's a very calm one or a very aggressive one. And as you can see, participants are very, very well attuned to recognizing the gentle versus rude movements, regardless of whether they're performed by a human or by a robot. On the other hand, we have, of course, the perception or studying the robot as a reader. Here in our lab, some of the work that's been done has been on reading the gaze, on estimating, sorry, the videos are a bit laggy here, on estimating what's the origin of the movement, whether the motion that we are seeing is biological or not. This is based on the 2/3 power law, on the speed with which we move, depending on whether we move in a straight line or in a circular line. And this is the work by Alessia Vignola, who has done a very nice biological motion classifier that works not only when there is a person in the picture, but also if, as you can see, the person is using a tool or it's partially or completely occluded, but the algorithm can still detect with a very nice success rate whether the motion is biological or not. And this allows the robot to read exactly the scene and be aware of the people that are interacting with it. Of course, in the same line as what we were saying before with Vicky, there is the affective computing, so the ability to read expressions. This is a little bit of an older work that's based on the OpenFace software that back in the 2016 and 17 was the more recent one. However, now we also have the work of Pablo Barros that is working with the face channel. So unlike the OpenFace, the new work is deep learning based, so it's using ConvNets, and it's no longer recognizing just the facial expressions, but also kind of evaluating it more on the arousal valence scale. So that was summarizing what the lab is doing. What I wanted to do in the PhD was actually look beyond this action perception loop, since what we saw now was essentially precisely that. The role of the robot as a reader or as a communicator is actually the robot either doing actions or perceiving from the people. But as we know, I mean, even though we've seen that there is a lot of advance from both sides, and today's workshop has shown that really nicely. So both from the perceptive modules and from action, manipulation, dynamic movement, we make a lot of progress, but this still, I would argue, is lacking something to bring it together. So, and actually, it's not a unique idea, since today we heard it repeated several times during the talks. So what we, in my opinion, are missing in order to reach autonomy is actually expanding the loop with cognition. So I always enjoy very much these drawings from David Vernon. We co-taught a module on cognitive HRI for the PhD students at the University of Genova. And we always do this thought experiment of looking just into action and perception as a closed loop and trying to imagine a robot that has this closed loop of action perception performing these kind of activities. And in this kind of experiment with the students, we always reach the conclusion that there's something missing, whether that's a memory module, whether that's anticipation module, or maybe an adaptation when something unexpected happens and we don't have an answer for that. So, and also this is similarly summarizing the goals of the research in our lab, which is to have the desired capabilities of a cognitive robot that can not only perceive, but can anticipate what the human needs, and doing so, by the way, guided by some kind of intrinsic motivation, it can show this to the people. So to expand the action perception loop, we look into cognition. Cognition is precisely this kind of expansion by allowing the robot to learn, to adapt to changes, and also to anticipate what the person needs or how the person will react in the interaction. In my PhD, I focused on designing a cognitive framework for HRI, guided by these kind of, let's say, desirable functionalities in a cognitive robot. So the framework in question for ICAB was very much based on the cognitive functionalities, and we looked, we looked into an architecture that would allow the robot not only to perceive the state of the human and act, but also to have some kind of information about each person, about their preferences, and actually before acting, predicting what kind of action would be the best in that moment, and then after evaluate if its prediction was correct or not, and then modifying or reinforcing its memory. So this was a work done originally in my PhD, but that's still going on now in the postdoc. And it was on carrying and validating this framework in a socially adaptive HRI scenario. When we worked on the framework, we focused more on the perception and on the, let's say, adaptive and motivation parts, since in theory, a cognitive framework that has this kind of socially or effectively computing perceptive abilities and the cognitive module can be adapted for different contexts of interaction. So the actions themselves are not so crucial when formulating the basis of the framework, but they come later. For the perception itself, I will not focus a lot on it. I mean, people talked already about the different kind of perceptive capabilities. To answer Vicky's question from before, yes, the ICAB can still has the tactile sensors from before. So currently, all of the evaluation, if a touch from the person is nice or is with negative valence, is done after receiving the touch, based on the area covered and on the strength of the or the pressure exhibited. So what you can see here is, for instance, show it again, a slow kind of caressing move on ICAB, whereas here you can see also the sensors a bit overheating and giving phantom signals, but you can also see more like spokes that are moving along the arm. So this gave us kind of affective signals on whether the person interacting with ICAB is giving a very positive tactile signal or kind of a negative or frustrated one. Then moving into the motivation and adaptation part of the framework, this was done in collaboration with Lula Cañamera and Antoine Hill at the University of Hertfordshire. So what we wanted for the motivation, I wanted to move away from the discrete kind of motivation that I used back in my master thesis, because I feel that it's not allowing for a really smooth kind of interaction. Still, being a discrete base will have a certain number of predefined states, whereas having kind of a continuous intrinsic motivation allows for interaction that's much closer to how we are. So, and precisely looking by biologically inspired motivation, we looked into the hormonally inspired one. So this is work done by Antoine Hill on attachment like HRI. And in its framework, he has a very nice comfort-based system that is based on an internal state of the robot called the comfort. The comfort is working very similarly together with the arousal system, the way cortisol behaves in people. And I will come back to this in a moment. I'm not so sure about the time. Can you maybe please ping me off on how much minutes we have? Because I know we started quite later.
You can finish, don't worry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear how many minutes.
You can, I guess, another 5 minutes, because we have already like started 10 minutes before you.
Okay.
I think.
Okay, perfect. No, that's perfect.
Okay, don't worry.
Okay, so for the motivation module, we based ours on Hill's comfort system, where the robot has this intrinsic variable for the comfort that can decay or grow depending on how the interaction is going. So the comfort of the robot during the interaction is decaying when the person is ignoring them, or if the person is giving them very negative feedback. And vice versa, when the person is interacting with the robot in a positive way, be it with positive facial expressions or interacting with the toys that we had, or providing a positive tactile feedback, the robot's comfort is growing. This is here to show a comparison for when we have an intrinsic comfort motivation that doesn't learn and doesn't adapt, and when we do have one. So what you can see on the left side is that in the bottom graph, there is the signal stimuli from the person, which is the facial expressions or the tactile stimuli or the person showing the toys to ICAP at close distance. And on the upper one, you have the robot's comfort. So when the person starts ignoring the robot, the comfort is decaying and it's hitting the critical threshold. But every time that the person starts ignoring the robot, as you can see, the comfort has the same kind of trend because the robot doesn't learn anything. And what we mentioned before is that the adaptation in this kind of module consists of the robot updating its so-called social variables, which are the decay and growth rate of the comfort. So if the robot can notice that the person is ignoring them maybe, or prefers to interact less sparsely, if the robot is in an adaptive mode, it can update this kind of social variable so that its decay happens over much longer time. And in fact, that's what's happening here. So the decay rate has been updated in the adaptive interaction. And when the person is ignoring the robot will take much longer before it reaches a critical threshold. We validated this during my PhD in interaction with ICAB. We did a study on the social adaptable framework. I will not go into a lot of detail now. However, the study is fully described and the results in the Frontiers paper, the citation of which is down there. Basically, what we wanted to evaluate was whether the robot that's always guided by this kind of intrinsic motivation is perceived differently by participants if it adapts to them, so if it modifies its intrinsic value, or if it doesn't. To very quickly go over the results. In the study also, because we wanted to force behavioral changes in the participants, we introduced halfway through the interaction a secondary task during which the participants had to do a puzzle that really required a bit of cognitive load. So they had to ignore the robot by force. The research questions in the study were how often would ICAB be reaching the boundaries, the threshold of its comfort, and how would people react to these changes? We wanted to know the subjective evaluation of the participants, which is whether they would notice that the robot is behaving differently in the two sessions, and would actually any kind of feelings of the participants for the interaction depend on the adaptivity. And also then the so-called objective or behavioral evaluation, which is how participants would actually change their interaction, not how they would evaluate it afterwards in the questionnaires, but how would they behave during it. I will quickly jump over some of the results. So participants liked the ICAB, judging on their iOS rating of closeness, and the Godspeed questionnaires on animacy and likability, liked it more as a result of the time. So the order of the session or the adaptivity level of ICAB didn't have any statistical significance, but all participants, regardless of how they interacted with the robot, expressed increased liking as a function of the time they spent with it. They were definitely not aware that ICAB was adaptive in one session and fixed in the other. So they didn't notice any kind of differences, or if they said which session they preferred, they usually expressed that ICAB was more interactive in the second session of interaction, regardless whether that was adaptive or fixed. And this was most likely due to the time that they spent with the robot. So also participants learned how the robot responded to them. And as a result, they had a more interactive session. From the behavioral evaluation, we can see here the comparison of how much time the robot spent in an interactive, which is the red, or in an idle state. The divisions here are the free interaction, the part where the participant had the secondary task, and then the second free interaction phase. So the noticeable difference here is that whenever the robot was in an adaptive condition, the participants had a more consistent mode of interaction. So during the secondary task, it didn't drop so much because the robot had kind of learned if participants interacted very often or very sparsely. And also for the behavioral evaluation of the stimuli, what was very interesting for us was that most participants, with the exception of the ones that the first time interacted with the robot in a fixed state, most of them kept the tactile interaction on a relatively consistent level. So unlike the face, which is shown here in yellow, that you can see that always drops between the first and the second and the third stage when the participant had to work on the puzzle, the tactile stimuli didn't show this trend. So what we saw that participants, after they learned that the robot liked being caressed and touched, even when they had to focus on the secondary task, they still would keep tactile contact with the robot while they were doing the task. So that was a very nice finding for us, and also I think Vicky will like it for the effective tactile stimuli. To conclude very quickly with the current ongoing work that we've just started, but it's actually concerning with trust in HRI. So this is work done by my student Sara Mangila, who is starting to study trust in human-robot interaction. What she's seen so far is that as identified by Hancock, the different kind of factors influencing trust in HRI can be divided broadly into human, robot-related, and environmentally related. And out of these, in a survey done on a lot of HRI studies, usually the most impactful ones are the robot-related factors, in particular the transparency of the robot, the reliability, and its social behavior. So one thing to look into, since the reliability of the robot and the transparency are usually connected with the task in question, we wanted actually to study a bit more the social behavior, and also to see how trust is formed and how it's studied in human-human interaction. So the current work of Sara is concerning with the neuropsychoeconomic NP model of trust, and in particular with the neuro side of it, since on the economic and the psychological or social side, there is a lot of research, especially concerning the trust game, as also Lorenzo showed. Sara wanted to investigate a little bit more on the neurochemical level or on the hormonal, actually. So looking into the hormones, what we found was that the group of 4 hormones that are the so-called social ones, or influencing trust and social behavior the most, were oxytocin, testosterone, dopamine, and cortisol. And initially, Sarah was interested into studying oxytocin, as it's the one that's most often shown as the trust hormone. However, there have been a lot of findings saying that studies on trust and oxytocin are very hard to replicate. And so we switched directions and we moved on to cortisol, which is a very nice circling back to the study that's done with Lola Cañamera and Antoine Hill, where the comfort-based intrinsic motivation was again very similar to the cortisol paradigms. So currently Sarah is studying the different kind of paradigms for increase and decrease of cortisol, and is planning to implement kind of a model of cortisol for social behavior and trust in the robot. That's summing up all of the work. As far as the future and the next 10 years, for my personal side, I think I would very much like to unite the knowledge I've gained from cognitive HRI and bring it back to assistive robotics. And instead, from the IIT side and the next years in cognition, we have started from last year the ICOG scientific initiative, which is an open source initiative with the goal of essentially creating a very nice advanced knowledge base for human cognition and sharing a common cognitive architecture. I think that that kind of is a nice point to end. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm here for questions. Or maybe we can go to the panel discussion if I've over-exceeded my time.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. I think in general, all of the talks have been fascinating. My personal interest lies towards the last one, but like, thank you. Before we go to the panel discussion, I think we have a little time for 1 or 2 questions. So if anyone from the audience has a question. If not, I have several.
I'm leaving the screen share on in case we have. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a few, but I will try to limit for the purpose of time. So you talked about the intrinsic motivation, which is something that I was also very, very interested. And so in that sense, what would you think is the, would you have any link between, let's say, the motivational system and a potential emotional system? That also is kind of like linking back to Lorenzo's talk, but also the fact that there are links between, you know, the motivational and emotional system. So
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, I lost like the last second. I think maybe the connection dropped.
What's your opinion on that, or what would be? Yeah,
I think they're definitely very linked. So I think affect is in general a cornerstone of social interaction. So since I'm studying HRI from the social side, I definitely think that emotions play a part in it. And I mean, my work has also tried to cover the dual role of them, both from the side of reading the emotions of the people that the robot is interacting with, but also I'm interested in implementing them in one way or another in the robot's motivation. So, and this is kind of covering. So during my master's, I went into the more discrete probabilistic approach. So implementing some kind of pseudo-emotional states for the robot that would guide the action selection process. But in general, I'm very much interested by the neural approach, so the neurohormonal approach, because I think it's very similar to how it works in people, so how hormones regulate our behavior. And I can go back to the very nice table of Sarah, which looking into the hormones, you can see how much they're connected with every aspect of social interaction. So it can regulate the decision making, it can regulate whether we perceive affective inputs in a positive or a negative way. So depending on which hormones are increased in us, we have a predisposition to either interpret very positive way or in a very negative way. So precisely cortisol, for example, is leading to a negative bias in face recognition. So this is why I'm very much interested in the hormonal inspired motivation for robots, because I think it opens the path for emotions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Tony has a question. Tony?
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Margaret Bowden wrote an essay, I think for Eon, saying that robots could never be like humans because they don't have oxytocin. So at what point do you think the simulation of these hormonal and affective systems will give robots something which is sufficiently comparable to human emotion to sort of satisfy the many skeptics out there who think that robots can't have emotion and that this is really a barrier to human-robot relationships?
Thank you. It's a very nice question. I think it deserves like a 1 hour discussion by itself. So because I'm always interested in my main interest, let's say, is assistive robotics. Even though I have a lot of years in research in cognitive HRI, I would say my main driving goal is not to get the robot as similar to people as possible, but it's which aspects of human interaction, of human behavior, or of human biology can be used in the robot to facilitate HRI. Whether it's using hormones because it allows for a more natural intrinsic motivation, but my goal isn't to start trying to essentially implement every single hormone of the human body in the robot. It's insanely complicated and complex.
Well, it's probably not necessary to copy it completely, but I think it's in assistive robotics, particularly if you're using sort of affect in robots for communication, then you know, a lot of the criticism of assistive of effective robotics is that it's intrinsically deceptive, and you know, it's something that I'm very interested in, and personally I think that there is an answer to this, that there is a level at which robots can behave emotionally in a way which isn't deceptive, and I wonder, you know, if that's something that you see as a goal, or do you see it more being about the communication, that the emotional expression is really about improving the interaction capability of the robot, maybe improving its decision making, but that you'd want to be upfront with end users that this isn't like human emotion, or would you want to make an argument that on some level it is like human emotion?
That's a very loaded question.
I'm trying to make it as neutral as possible.
Yeah, so
you don't have to take a view. You could sit on the fence.
No. I enjoyed the question a lot. Also because, I mean, obviously, depending on whether we want to see, if we're doing a study on whether people will show emotions, whether they feel very social to robots, then it really is, it matters whether you tell them that ICAP can recognize your feelings, ICAP can be happy, ICAP doesn't recognize at all, ICAP is a pre-programmed robot, or it has some.
Yeah, and I think Cynthia Breeziel has argued that you know, it's necessary to some extent have this, you know, even if you think it's an illusion, it's still necessary to present the robot as an emotional entity in order for people to have this kind of quality of interaction with it. So that's another approach to the question.
Yeah, I can say from my experience in child-robot interaction that even when the robot is not presenting any kind of emotions, so in particular, for instance, for the HRI study with the autistic children, the robot wasn't pretending to have emotions, wasn't having any kind of affective info, but was just presenting the exercises for the children. It didn't affect negatively the interaction. So the autistic children were very, very happy interacting with the robot. And even if the robot was not expressing anything, it didn't affect. At the same time, we have from Kirsten's project, from the Aurora project with Kaspar, that it can definitely be used to teach children about how interaction has emotional consequences. So the robot can express emotions and can learn, can teach the children something about how, about social protocols, about how to behave with neurotypical children. It's never been the goal to pretend that robots have real emotions for now. However, if we are analyzing the fact that in people, the emotions that we feel are based on how hormones shift in us, on how we have a history of interaction with one person, and how we see one person, and we have maybe a gut feeling about them on whether positive or negative, we can break down emotions to these kind of factors that influence them. I'm not saying that it's identical for robots, but if we have an intrinsic motivation system that's based on emotions, sure, yeah, to a very small, very basic level, they have it, and it influences the decision making. So it's a robotic emotion. It's not human-like emotion, but well, I would give that as a neutral.
I think we could. It's also interesting to look at the idea of transparency. So you show people what the mechanism of, and you see whether the emotional interaction is still as effective as if you don't show them that. And my feeling is that won't particularly affect people's interaction. They may understand that it's a robot. They may understand that there's an algorithm underlying the emotional expression, but it probably won't affect the quality of the interaction. So that's one way to address that.
In fact, in the last study that we did with ICAB for where the robot was basically in the role, let's say, of a toddler, and participants were taking care of it while doing also the secondary task, we did inform participants that ICAB enjoys when you talk to it, ICAB enjoys when you play with the toys, or if you're smiling and caressing it. So we are using inherently effective words. I mean, the phrasing is effective. It's not saying ICAB's values will increase positively. It says enjoys, likes. And participants have this knowledge that, okay, so you like being touched. It's up to every one of us, I think, to decide if that means that participants really give ICAB a very human-like emotional system, or if they just understand that it's a sort of computer processing input. So.
Thank you. Roger has a question, so.
This is like a follow-up to what Tony was just talking about. And aren't there humans that have, and the psychologists would say have emotional deficits that learn to fake it? And if that's true, then certainly there's no reason why we couldn't have, code robots or teach robots with AI to essentially do the same thing, where they have those whether they have the same details that give us emotions or not isn't important, right? That's what you were just saying. But anyway, if humans can fake it, robots should be able to fake it too, right?
Exactly.
And actually,
faking it.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, yeah.
I was saying I'm one of those that's faking it. But see, totally laughing.
Okay. I thought you also had a follow-up question, because what I was gonna say is that since this is already kind of a discussion, and also I think that Lorenzo also has part of his work is based on emotions and motivation, and because in the end emotions can work two ways, right? It can be either for communication purposes or an assessment method system, so that any organism could go towards something that is good or avoid something that is bad. So in that sense, because I think it's also semi-discussion time, Lorenzo, what is also your take on these points?
I mean, I'm very fascinated by this last talk. So more than questions, I will study and I will look at all the papers that Anna mentioned in his presentation. So I don't have a very clear idea of it, because I mean, I think that we all don't have a clear idea that there was this, let's say, in the last work of Barrett also, and I don't know what to say about this. I think that probably, I'm not sure of it, but the great change in human-robot interaction will be done thanks to a better emotional assessment, which I think that is emerging the fact that very clearly that is given by a multi-channel analysis, let's say. So from physiological part, kind of data, from facial expression recognition, from there are studies about thermal camera, for example, that we are looking at to extract some, for example, to study the irrigation of blood in the distribution of blood in different facial expressions. I mean, I also like very much this thing of hormones. So the possibility to replicate this kind of mechanisms simulate this kind of mechanism in a robot. I don't know. I'm curious, and I hope to have some part in this in this kind of evolution. And that's it. I mean.
Yeah, because you also have made this valence system, right? I don't know to what extent your systems are also have a motivational component, because I would assume that the idea there is that the robot goes more into proactive. So like, it's not just a passive receptor of information or of events that it just reacts, but it actually proactively engages into specific actions. So because it needs to fulfill its own, let's say, goals, right? Or at least this would be one of the reasons for a motivational system. So yeah.
Yes, we are trying to give a particular attention to understand, for example, which path of behaviors can bring to stimulate some emotional reaction in a subject. This is, for example, is very important in subject with Alzheimer's disease, because the emotional reaction often is almost not present. So the robot can be used as an investigator of different possibilities of behavior, to understand, for example, for example, in the work of personality, what kind of personality, what kind of interaction, also by behavioral point of view, can be stimulating for a subject. And we have the possibility today to use many kind of affective devices to understand if this happens also in a, let's say, in a level that is not clearly evident from the outside, from a person. So yes.
Great. And one question that I think was also just to maintain the format, what would you say were like the biggest, let's say, breakthroughs and challenges so far in this specific field, as we have addressed it in the previous field? So question to both or all.
I think that, I mean, I feel also by the other presentation that talk about, for example, manipulation, that there is a huge importance of contextual reasoning, meaning that even the last works on emotions says that an emotion is not something that is there in our mind, in our bodies, and that's it, but it has to be considered inside a context. So definitely, probably this is something that if it would be improved in the reliability of judgment from this kind of systems, will improve also the quality and the naturalness of the interaction. This is a key point for me.
I was checking to see if there was also Dengo, but I don't see him in the participants.
Yeah, Dengo is not. Yeah, he's not in the.
Okay,
okay.
okay.
So
Okay, so it just has to. So I can answer this from the two fields in which I'm torn, because on one side there is the cognitive HRI, on the other side there is the socially assistive robotics. So I think in socially assistive robotics, something that I'm very excited about is that there is the increase of participatory design. So one of my biggest issues with that was that even if you look back in the last 20 years of studies with autistic children, the people participating in the design of the studies are either only the roboticists or the roboticist and the therapist of the children, sometimes the parents. And now in recent years, like starting from 2016, 17 onwards, there are more and more studies that look into participatory design, into talking with the children themselves to design, whether it's for HCI, so for human-computer interaction. There is the group in Vienna of Kata Spiel and Geraldine that have worked with autistic children to design their own objects for interaction, that I think is very nice. And also later on talking with maybe autistic adults that have either medium or high functioning autism that can really give firsthand experience and recount of what was working for them, what wasn't. So I'm really excited for that as a breakout, let's say, in socially assisted robotics. For cognitive robotics, I don't think there has been one thing uniting us. In March of this year, we had the Transair workshop from the University of Bremen organized, where essentially we had the LIDA, Clarion, SOAR, Armarex people, everyone there talking about cognition. And I think that in the cognitive robotics field, we are all coming up with our own frameworks, with our own thing, and talking either about theory or implementation, but there still hasn't been the unification. And I think that's a challenge. I don't know if it will happen. I mean, I followed in the same trend. Instead of implementing an already existing architecture, I was, okay, let's design our own basic framework for cognitive HRI. So that's a problem in the field. And it will be a nice challenge to see how it goes.
These are very good points, and I completely agree on the participatory design, which is something that extends to a lot of different fields, from educational robotics to health. So yeah, absolutely right. Paul, please, has raised his hand, so yes.
Yeah. Hi, hello everybody. First, a great workshop. Great to see you all. Great to see you, Vicky. So stuff is happening, which is of course wonderful, but I would like to follow up on what Anna was saying, that indeed it feels all a little bit unsystematic. And I think that is a bit of a shame, because that means collectively we don't build anything. Like we all start again from scratch and we're not progressing. And I think there we just as a community have to also start to build consensus around, let's say, principles, where you say, look, these are basic accepted principles of architectures. For instance, when I look at Lorenzo's architecture, I clearly see similarities to the easel architecture. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And we should sort of build on that, because these are not things we have to reestablish and reestablish and reestablish. Then we laid down foundations. The same thing in Anna's architecture on intrinsic motivation. I also recognize elements from other systems, and that's not bad. That's great, because it means we are converging to a common understanding. And I think that's something that we really should start to embrace more than we do. Of course, I also have my own preferences, but if we really want to solve complex tasks, we need solid ingredients, right? And we build solid ingredients by testing each other's ideas and coming to a common understanding. So that's one thing about systematics. I really think we have to improve in that sense. And the other thing, in terms of application domains in HRI, I mean, for instance, autism is mentioned, and participatory design. Yes, it's a necessary condition, but it's not the secret for success, because you might be in the end implementing the biases of different user groups. Okay, that might not be really the way forward, right? So what I'm often missing in that discussion is what are actually really the principles you want to deliver to your end user, right? So for instance, if you talk about autism, what are we actually solving here? Is it about reducing emotional complexity? Is it about reducing environmental complexity? What's the problem we're solving? By just throwing robots at autists, we're not necessarily solving anything, right? So I think also there it would be great, I think, if we articulate more precisely what exactly the problem that we try to solve and how we try to solve as scientific hypothesis. So because then we can do hypothesis testing and we can learn something. Otherwise, again, we're all de novo inventing stuff, and it's fun and it keeps us all busy, but we're not building a path into the future, right? So I think it's all great work that you guys are all doing and presenting today. but we have to build more bridges between what we are doing now, what has happened in the past, and what we want to do in the future.
Absolutely.
I completely agree. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go.
No, just to say that I completely agree with Paul, and we are probably working everywhere and everyone in different but similar things, and we should we should explore the synergy between different approaches. Yes, of course, this is the real key point probably, and the real breakthrough thing. The first one was the interdisciplinarity, but that I think that we are living from since a few years the benefits of this interdisciplinarity, but we need also more sharing and more connections among researchers of this field. Yes, of course. Thank you, Paul. Yeah.
So then one question, since these are all linked to close the discussion as it has exceeded, but it's so interesting. I think I could talk and discuss for hours here. Where do you see this field going, or where would you like to see this, or the future of this field? Because, you know, there's so many things. How do you see the future in this field?
I can just say, let's say, a personal hope that is probably very far, which is beyond the applications. I mean, I think that this kind of I don't know how to say creators that we are giving life to. They are platforms. They are mirrors in which we can analyze ourselves. So I should say that I hope someday they will have to teach us something, meaning the learn by doing approach. You know, so trying to emulate, to understand something that we do not know about our cognition, which I think is not really happening now, but I hope is the future probably. You know.
I agree completely with Lorenzo. So if I need to add anything, it would just mirror what Paul was saying before, that it would really be nice to have a little bit of unification between all of the different people working in, not just in cognitive HRI, but also in neuro-robotics. So.
Yes.
Excellent. So Tony, Paul and Tony has raised their hands. So Tony first and then Paul.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we have in our field is that we have lots of robot platforms and it's difficult to translate software across them. So our spin-out company, CyberSolves, I just wanted to give a mention to what they're trying to do. They've got a middleware system called Animus, which is supposed to make it really easy to translate your software across different robots. It's already configured, I think, for 5 or 6 different robots, including Pepper and Now and Miro and several others. Not yet ICA, but I hope that can be added. I think if you look at what happened in mobile phone technology, it really started to come together once there was iOS and Android, and developers could build just for those 2 operating systems. And I also mentioned this in my talk, you know, this idea of this constraints that deconstrain. So if you can unify around one way of interfacing, then you can really open up the possibilities both on the hardware side and the software side. So as a community, we could maybe move towards that. I'll put a link in Discord if people want to know more about what we're trying to do with Animus.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. Well, what I would like to put forward is, look, what social interaction and social cognition is incredibly complicated as a process, right? And this is something we can seriously approach working as a community, but we will never scale to anything interesting if we keep on moving forward in this fragmented way. And for instance, one thing we have done in the WYSIWYT project, which Vicky knows very well, knows some others in this workshop, we also released the architecture, the ICAP architecture we built for that. This was a social robot that learns to interact with the environment, that learns to label the world, that learns to speak, to articulate what it sees. It can also do introspection and report what it has done in the past. It's a really interesting system. So we released that architecture. I don't think many people actually picked that up. Okay, so be it. But at least this is one way in which we can move forward. Let's share also our models. Let's make sure they're shareable so that we also have replication. You know, so maybe this is also a very concrete way forward to say, look, let's have a living machine social robotics shared repository, and maybe also shared environments where we can test these architectures that in common tasks, you know, that we really can understand what we are collectively doing. Maybe that could be a very practical way forward. Of course, it means work, right? Someone has to also volunteer to do that. But I think this might be very concrete way to make a step towards also more, let's say, an integrative perspective. So let's do something about it. And let's also organize common workshops where our students work together across these different architectures, right? If we do that together, I think we can really make great progress. If we don't, then it will stay fragmented and we keep on sort of touching the surface of the depth of social cognition in robotics.
Yes, Anna, please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I just wanted to add on to what Paul was saying. So absolutely. And it's also one of the main goals in the iCode initiative, particularly since in it are a lot of people that were with the iCAP project from its beginning and that have now dispersed throughout the world. So we're trying to recreate exactly this kind of knowledge sharing. And Tobias Fisher was also one of, I think, possibly the first speaker that we had last year at the iCode event. We are trying to organize workshops where people that have worked on the iCAP system, people that work on YARP and on ROS can really give workshops about interoperability of the middleware for different robots. And I think it's definitely something that we all need.
So did you also then integrate or look at this architecture Tobias published?
So we have, I think, one or two of the PhD students in our group that, because Tobias was presenting exactly this architecture last year in December, I think 2020, that have now started looking into it. So we are really trying to.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Also, most of the code that we have for iCub, I mean, it's open source. It's available.
I know. Now, also, Vicky has done a great job in packaging that up, right? So let's talk together about that. That's really great. That's good to know. So wonderful.
Yep.
Great.
I'm actually strong to this field, obviously, but in manipulation, for example, we didn't really use ROS for a long time because ROS was at the beginning developed mostly for mobile robotics, and manipulation involved physical interaction with the world. So that was a problem. We didn't have a physical engine that could deal with grasp. I remember having physical engine, you were applying grasp, and since there were contact and force apply from two sides, the object would have flew away, and we had actually to work on that to stabilize that. You're talking about different architectures, so I'm assuming process it might be one of those, and I just wanted to know if you haven't taken as a community ROS into consideration for some particular reasons, or is just because it was not close to your work?
Actually, in that sense, I think that they're talking more about the cognitive architectures in terms of, because for human-robot interaction, one of the main, I mean, in all of the fields, you have a certain number of problems that are like perception, actuation, but especially with human-robot interaction, there are added extra, I would say, added problems in terms of understanding not only the physical, but also the social environment in that sense, right? That means that, for example, the robot ideally should have some sort of inference of the internal state of the person that it's interacting with, in that, so that it would, again, in the ideal world, act accordingly. So in that sense, usually most of these architectures have different kinds of components, which would go like from reactive to adaptive to contextual, like the one that also Tobias and Paul is referring to, which is the DAC and the DAC architecture, or parts of that. And in that, within that, then ROS would be, in that sense, more of like the middleware for communication or exchange of information, rather than like an important, like a component, like a, yeah, maybe for the ICAP, it's usually YARP instead of ROS, that has been used extensively as a middleware. And there are different kinds of modules that facilitate specific interactions, like from navigation or whatever. But I would say that for what is important in most of these architectures is how information is processed, meaning is given to them, so that then you would generate actions that are relevant not only to what the robot is doing, but also to what the human is doing and what is happening in the environment. And I think that Tony has a point. I don't know if that would cover before we move to Tony in that sense, Claudio.
I mean, with regard to ROS, it isn't really a cross-platform. I mean, it is a standard across the field, but it doesn't allow you to take the software and instantly run it on somebody else's robot. And it's difficult to learn. It's quite a steep learning curve, which takes people several months. I mean, we all know that you know, SoftBank have stopped production of Pepper, which is a bit of a blow, I think, to social robots. And they of course created Choreograph, which was supposed to enable people to build their own apps for Pepper. That clearly hasn't caught on sufficiently, and I think a lot of the problems with Pepper was people were buying them and then they didn't know how to use them, they didn't have software to use them, and they were returning them, or they were just sitting being used. And it's you know, the robot that has sold, I think 27,000 nows and Peppers have been sold. But that robot isn't enough. That's not enough of an ecosystem to create the developers you need to grow the field. So I think we have to work across platforms, and manufacturers have to give up this idea that, you know, people are going to build software bespoke for their platform, and we should find ways of making the software platform independent. I'm not sure if the sort of notion of apps is going to translate into robots the way it works for mobile phones, because, you know, as Vicky just said, there's a lot of cognitive architecture that you need to have before you can create any of these functionalities that we want to have for social robots. So you know, we still to figure out how to do this well, you know, sort of because you're going to have to integrate your perceptual systems, your cognition systems, all these different things, your emotional systems. We want to make it modular, we want to make it extendable. I think the iCub repository is an attempt at that, but to scale up to sort of worldwide production and to do this commercially is going to take a step change. I'm not sure where that will come from.
Well, with Tony, also to follow up on that, I think, as you know, for instance, Google already a while back, right? They also thought they could conquer the field of robotics by buying up a whole bunch of actually really very well functioning robotics companies, including Boston Dynamics. But after a few years, they gave up because it turned out to be just a tough problem. And now with SoftBank, you see something similar, and maybe we should pay attention to that, right? So these are hard problems. And if the guys with the big money cannot solve it, maybe we just have to be smarter than they are, or they were. So maybe it's not really about the massive investments. Maybe it's also really about the principles of how we build the control systems for these kinds of robots. So that's, I think, one angle that we should take and elaborate, but it also raises a very important questions about platforms, right? iCub is, of course, an existing platform, but it's not necessarily very robust. It takes a lot of effort to keep that system going. And I understand it. It's a research platform. That's fine. But if you want to push a form of social robotics, we also need platforms to test these. And these platforms have to be robust. So how are we going to do that? We all move to simulation. Well, that's also not the same, right? So I really feel there's a gap here of experimental platforms. So do you have suggestions on what route to take? Don't say Miro. I come down to Sheffield and beat you up.
Well, Miro is a very robust platform. So
don't provoke me, Tony. You're provoking me now.
I'm also on the hating Miro team. I have had very bad experiences.
Well, it's got a good stereo vision, stereo hearing, high resolution cameras, but anyway, so I think the problem is software, and if we could have a standard architecture that people added their stuff to, and we could make it work on multiple platforms, that would be a way forward. But it takes somebody to decide that they want to put their money and effort into supporting that high level system. If that can become a piece of commercial software, or even if the issue with open source is that until somebody finds out a way to make money out of the open source repository, it's never going to be robust enough. I mean, Red Hat Linux might be a model. I mean, Red Hat managed to make money out of what is an open source piece of software, and we maybe need companies that will come along and try and do that for cognitive architectures. But there isn't one there yet who's doing that.
I don't see that happening anytime soon. But I think the effort that IIT has put into certain platforms might be also really a good attractor to work with. And I think we should take this as our collective challenge, and we should really try to work together across, let's say, also the different platforms we have, and also including our workshops and conferences, to try to have a collective effort also outside the directly financed projects. So let's find ways to do that, to also really link them with a more intensity to this iCognition or iCog, whatever it's called, project that Anna mentioned. BCBT, of course, is a platform we have, and Living Machines, where we are today. Maybe we should make sure that we build a collective effort to move this forward. If we also, in that sense, keep on competing, that's not going to help either. And for me, the most practical way forward would be, for instance, to again revisit the ICOP platform and see, okay, how can we push that forward as at least a research platform that's sustainable?
I mean, there is obviously opportunities in Horizon Europe for us to come together, develop a project. The deadline is October 22nd. There's a call about robot cognition, which would be a good fit.
Yeah, I volunteer Anna to coordinate. It's a great idea, Tony.
My hand was not up for that. My hand was up for a different question.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I pulled the card on less experience, so now I'm nowhere near for the Horizon Europe Pillar 3. So I'm in the Pillar 1, initial starting, or 2, wherever they are. No, I wanted to just bring up the point, because we are talking about two different things here when we talk about software and middleware. So I think it brings up a very interesting discussion point on should they matter, especially for people that are very deeply into the cognitive theory, that would argue for the embodied approach, that also the middleware of the robotics platform matters. The choice of which middleware you have influences, same as how which body a person has influences how they learn and develop through life. On the other hand, if we look at them as two separate things, then we focus on the cognitive frameworks that are part of the software for a robot, and we try to reach unification there. And then in theory, they are kind of middleware independent. The framework in question, by the way, that I was presenting before, I've run it both on ROS for the Miro when I was in Hatfield, and on the iCub with YARP, because as a software implementation, it was independent. So you connect it with the middleware of the robot in question, but you can still have a multi-platform framework. It was a very, very simple one, absolutely, but a C++ software framework that ran on two different, very different robotic platforms. So I think it's an interesting discussion on whether the middleware should be completely independent from the cognitive framework or not.
Well, I mean, I tried to argue in my talk on Wednesday that the brain has this hourglass architecture, which John Doyle has talked about, and if you look at the basal ganglia, it does appear to be that. It is a abstraction layer between the behavior coordinating systems and the sensory motor systems that allow you to develop and enact plans and behaviors through a relatively universal mechanism. And basal ganglia is as old as the vertebrate brain. So I think there's something to be said to looking for that within our control systems architecture. I mean, the brain is modular, but in an interesting way, a way that's different from most robot control systems. But nevertheless, I think we can model it at a relatively abstract level and make interesting progress. I think we've shown that with DAC, which has been expressed at multiple levels. But I think even at the more abstract levels, we're really capturing a lot of what the brain is doing in these sorts of architectures. And we're making progress, but we at the end of the WYSIWYG project, which was 3 years ago, we had a great system, which was pretty much state of the art, but I don't know if any of the WYSIWYG labs are still able to run those demos. So it's really a bit of a tragedy that we cannot build incrementally on the work that we've done in the past, that we have to fall back and start again sometimes.
Exactly. Well, we can't. So right now, so this was one of Wiki's missions to try to keep that going. And I don't think it got completed.
No, it was.
Well, in Abu Dhabi, maybe they want to do this, sponsor it.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Okay, Vicky.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
As always, the problem is versioning and like old code that can, as always, and then some parts that worked then very well, but then there's a new, better solution now. So actually, in most of such systems like EFA, WYSIWYG, even EASL, which are European projects that had a humanoid robot, one way or another interacting with a human. The main issue there is that none of these actually, well, maybe IFA with WYSIWYG, but like none of these actually took advantage of work that was previously done, step on that and actually improve it in a way. So I think that definitely links back to the first point that Paul raised in terms of, maybe some things need to be centralized, or at least, something works well, centralize it, but then you need to maintain it, which is the actual problem, and keeping it updated, which is, I think in most labs, the main problem. Someone did something, it worked, and then it was left there. And then the other person takes it, makes a few tweaks, it worked, and then it's left there. But then it's never actualized and up to date, which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, has been like the curse of many code or labs or yeah, I don't know.
It's the nature, I think, of these European projects as they come together, they build stuff, and then they disperse. And I think the iCub is one of the exceptions in that it started something which is still going sort of 20 years later. And the other option is to go for something like coordination action, which living machines came from a coordination action. There is a call for robotics coordination actions. And that could simply coordinate, and it could, part of that could certainly be to coordinate sort of modular systems that can be extendable. I know you can't do research in coordination actions, but there is support there that could be used towards this. I mean, I've been in the Human Brain Project, as many people know, and that was basically an infrastructure project designed to do this for neuroscience. And they have been building the Neuro-Robotics platform, which aspires to be this kind of iterative engine. It's not that yet, but that's another, there is infrastructure there, and there is probably follow-on funding in eBrains for neuromorphic cognitive architectures, if we want to organize to try and get that. There are good people inside Human Brain Project want to make this work, but it requires people outside the project to get on board. So that could be one vehicle, but we may want to do our own.
Yep. But now, Anna, can you tell us a bit more about the strategy at IIT in terms of building a community around ICAP and the associated libraries?
Yeah.
Is there a strategy?
So the closest thing to a strategy is the scientific initiative that we're starting now. Since ICAP in the last 10 years, it got really shifted more on the perception and action, dynamic control, and all of those departments. And the original from Giulio and Giorgio, which was on the cognitive framework, is kind of dwindling, let's say. So ICOG as an initiative is an attempt to restart this. For now, it's a scientific initiative, which means that it's what we do in the free time. So it's not an extra department, or it's not a new line of research. It's the come all together and let's organize events and workshops. But I think, or I would like to hope, as a very young optimist, that it will stick. So we are doing workshops also for the PhD students, trying to really imbibe this spirit of multi-platform coding and seeing how we can restart the interest in cognitive frameworks. So I don't know how it will be long term. This is now the 5-year plan. So from last year, the ICOG scientific initiative, it will be a scientific initiative for the next 5 years. Depending on how it goes in these 5 years, maybe it can be a new push, or I don't know, application for a new project. So far, it's still mostly of.
There's a lot of labs. A lot of labs that have ICUBs that are now teenagers, and they are, they're in need of some upgrades. So I mean, I think an initiative that would, because you don't necessarily want to just get a new robot, and people generally don't have the funds for that. But sort of a project to upgrade ICUB and maybe would be a useful way of rebooting that community, because it's. It's not to say that other robots have come along that are a lot better. I mean, there's a shortage of really good humanoid platforms, and there was a plan from IIT to have another humanoid. What's the status of that?
There's the R1, if you mean.
Right. Yeah.
The R1 is, it's up and running, and it's currently the preferred platform for stuff like online object detection. So. Vadim, together with Elisa Maiatini, has done a lot of recent work on online object detection and deep learning. So it's a very nice platform for showing off. And it's also way simpler to manipulate, since it's more similar to Pepper. So it's a wheeled robot that has only the hands, I think. Whereas ICAB is quite more complex for control. My lab is one of the teenage going into college ICAB, let's say. So we have ICAB number 3. So number 1 and 2 are no longer used because I think are out of commission. The ready is number 3. So I'm very proud to have done my PhD with it.
Well, good luck. It's a great initiative, and would be more than happy to team up any way possible, because we have to work together to make progress.
Absolutely.
And with what Paul said, I think we should be closing the workshop, which is super interesting, I know, but like the other workshop has finished some time ago, and I was like, I was informed that, keep in mind that we do have the Discord, so some of the conversation can definitely continue there. And I think that there might be some email exchange for those who are interested, so to continue, or through Discord to continue this initiative, because everyone understands that this is a common necessity. So probably it's something that, you know, slowly should start fermenting as an idea and potentially happen. So with that note, I would like to thank you all. It has been an amazing 10th anniversary of Living Machines, and I think it will continue to be. I hope to see you all again next year, and maybe, you know, this could be a nice way for common research or common papers, and I mean, to another 10 years of Living Machines. You know, I entered as a kid and I came out from a Living Machines an adult. So so really nice talks. Thank you so much. I think that the people and the
That's true, Vicky. That's true, Vicky.
Those are the difficult years.
I know. So yeah, thanks to all of the submissions, thanks to the amazing talks, Claudio, Lorenzo, Anna, Uriel, everyone. So so I think with this we can close, and please continue the discussion in Discord. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Thanks very much.
So, Vicky, how are you doing there in Abu Dhabi?
You're muted, Vicky.
You're muted.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. It's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Any specifics about the original definition of very good?
there is a very weird echo, so I cannot hear.